And that's when you go into Superman pose, reset. So aside from the technical issues that we are bound to experience, we will gain some efficiencies in the use of these devices in many ways. Thank you. It's not working. So electronic versions of the commission meeting materials. I think especially for like executive session, grab and go, take those documents. Legal can load those ahead of time. Final orders that we can do electronic signatures on here, whether that's orders or your expense reports. Sorry, I run out of words for the week already. Workshop materials, of course, on-site meeting materials, draft materials like budget and strategic plan, and then agency-specific documents that we can provide to you, all in one nice little tablet. Get your signatures and do the documents as you see fit. Earlier access to meeting documents, yes and no. I mean, you get some of that on the website already, but certainly a reduction of paper. We print and print and print and print and print, and sometimes that's necessary, but when it's not, we like to try not to do that. And certainly, it can also give us a reduction in staff preparation time. So it's publishing instead of printing. When you get to the meeting, so these will stay on site. Should have been clear about that up front. These aren't going home. These will stay on site. These will be used for both board and commission meetings and on-site committee meetings. So they'll stay here. But you'll know that when you step up and you sit down, that the document in front of you that you pulled up is the most current version of that. So there shouldn't be any version issues. Ease of access to the different documents when you need to jump from, let's say you've got the meeting materials pulled up, and maybe you've got some text for how you want to read a motion or, right? Yeah. And then, of course, we'll have Teams access for audio and video integration for hybrid meetings. But we'll take a quick pause and state that we're also working with TFC. They reached out recently and said, hey, anybody interested in improving that room downstairs? And everybody's a loud whoosh when every agency and IT director in this building stood up and said, yes, we want to work with you on that. And so we've sent our recommendations in like the next day. And so I've sent my recommendations to some of their IT directors that have said, hey, are you interested in this? They've tacked onto that and added their thoughts. And so we hope that that room will become a little more electronically advanced so that we can integrate our Teams meetings, Zoom meetings, whatever types of meetings, electronic meetings go on down there, can just be integrated into that. This would help facilitate that as well. Okay. So what's the project timeline? It's kind of lengthy, except that we only meet quarterly. So today is an introduction, Surface meet commissioners meet Surface, just to initiate it. And then in the August meeting, we expect to have some volunteers to do a parallel test. You've got the paper beside you along with the tablet, see how that works. The August workshop, unfortunately, that comes after the meeting, but in the workshop, we can then take the notes that we get from the meeting, incorporate those into the workshop, and give everyone some training on the device itself, so that then by November, we can do a parallel test for everyone. And then in February, we go live. This is fluid, of course, depending on how things go and what your feedback is on the project itself. So this is meant to be a pretty high level, 30,000 foot view of what we're thinking about doing. I don't know if you've had experience in other boards. I know some of you on other boards, commissions, and how this is going, but I'd like to start by talking about what's your initial thoughts and concerns in doing this project.
So number one, what you did is already budgeted within the price right now?
We own these.
Okay.
We had a little extra money and found a pretty good deal, and so we pulled the trigger. And they'll get used one way or the other within the agency, but we own these devices. There's no additional cost to doing this. I only see a cost savings in print and soft dollars of staff time in preparation.
And delivery.
What about upgrading that room downstairs? Is that in the cost?
We don't know what that's gonna cost yet. We've offered, we've said, hey, we might even be convinced to pitch in some money. We haven't committed to anything at this point, but that room needs a lot of help down there.
We're different than every agency in the building in that they are an appropriated agency, so if they were to pitch in anything other than like end of year available funds, they would need to go to the legislature to ask for it.
Yeah.
And so we just said, if, you know, let us know what it's gonna cost. I don't know if we have it to spend. I don't know if they're talking about spending $40,000 or $500,000 or, we have no idea. But we wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, get a price before we commit.
Oh,
Yeah, we're not committed to anything, but we wanted to show how motivated we were into making that change. Other agencies have stated the same thing, right?
How many other agencies are in the just
Great question.
Thinking there's CPA, there's Water Board, there's GLO, there's.
Veterans,
Yeah, Veterans Board, and then there's the pardons.
And all of them use that room, right?
What?
Ag Commissioner.
Ag
What kind of
Commissioner,
percentage?
yeah,
wow.
so at least 6.
yeah,
It
and
may
some,
not be that.
and some smaller ones
Yeah.
too. We're tenants.
I think it sounds great, Steve.
So on the agenda packets, will those be mailed electronically, I assume?
So I probably have to go to Amber on that, but for the agenda, for the meeting packets,
This one.
you're getting, so the goal was to reduce paper as much as possible. And so we had hoped not to, I know some of you get those in advance, paper in advance, and some don't. So, you know, the goal would be to reduce that.
Everybody gets it in advance. It's just a matter of whether or not you get the link
Right.
to, when we post it to the website, you would then get the link. And at about the same time we do that, we print copies for those who've requested it in order to then FedEx those. So the idea would be that we would stop doing the printed copies that are FedExed, and that we would send the link ahead of time. And then you would receive the Surface when you arrive so that you could have it in front of you. The one variable I see, or the question I would be asking, is what about the notes I make on the version I have at home? And so I think we want to talk through that. I was thinking of my best case scenario, and I think if I had a notebook and said on page 54, that I think I'd rather have some
Oh, I see.
hard
So,
copy.
so we're accessing a community document that,
No,
Mhm.
or are
well,
we downloading a
You
PDF?
could
you
download
could do
it.
either.
Okay, so we can write on
Yeah,
comments on the PDF.
and for those of us who have poor eyesight, we can still get hard copies, right?
We would, you know, we would treat that like any other issue. So certainly we want to make it work.
Yeah.
We want to make it work. Right.
I can use the computer, it's just, after a while, my eyes just go.
Yeah, and we can work with that.
Yep.
It's not a problem.
So that's what I've been using for years, so this is the same thing that I have right now, where I can make notes on it.
Yeah.
That's right.
You got a great one.
The only variable with that is that you're making notes on the version that you download, and then if we have an updated copy, then we have to kind of communicate
Okay.
that, you know, if something changes. But we do that right now, right?
Yeah.
We just give you updated.
You could also
And
have
then-
two machines open.
Right.
With all the different versions?
Yeah.
I like it.
The versions don't often change.
It's more like additions.
It's their supplements, right? But we don't, we wouldn't like integrate new materials into your materials. We always do it as a supplement.
I was gonna say, yeah, because that's how we receive.
Yeah.
Right. And so that part wouldn't change. And we can, you know, I think the notes is a great one that we can look into when we do like our test run of like, well, how did this work and what happened here?
And some of that's so personal on just how you say notes, right?
Yeah, and so there's, you know, you can get as advanced as you want. Obviously, you could have a notebook next to you, and you can write page whatever, this is what I want. When I implemented this once before, each board member, each commissioner had their own individual link. And so they would access that remotely, they would make their own notes, and then we made sure, make those notes electronically. It's a little more work, but that's what they wanted. And they make those, and then we would make sure that that version was on their tablet when they showed up, so that their electronic notes were there.
And then any additional notes they made there would be saved for that specific.
Yeah,
project.
that, we gave them a specific instance, a specific copy of their own, right? And so, and then yes, during the meeting, if you made additional notes, you'd be making your copy, and then they would stay there. Some folks like making, like the little electronic stickies, others would rather just write on a notebook and say, I'll just bring it, and know that on page 15, I want to talk about
But-
X.
But if you did the stickies, then let's say a November meeting and you were in February, you could go back with those notes.
Yeah, I don't see why not. That would make kind of your repository. You can see the previous versions from previous meetings. So that would be individual links, you know, via SharePoint or something like that, but that's an option as well.
Does the PDF have table of contents?
I would expect it to, but I haven't had that conversation with Amber, so I can't commit to
It
that.
does not, it's usually, you know, I don't know if this most recent one was bookmarked, but it's typically bookmarked, so if you click on the bookmark, it will give you basically a table of contents, and you can click on item 14, item 16. I
Right.
don't know, and Amber's probably like, yes, it was
That would be
bookmarked.
really helpful because
That's how they typically are,
The
although
bookmarks.
I think I noticed that maybe it wasn't this time, but that could also be user error, which is very common over here.
Yeah,
But we
because
try and
you're-
bookmark them, so that way if you click that thing, and we can walk through this when we do the training and stuff, but you should be able to just go to that agenda item.
I like it.
So this
Yes,
is
ma'am.
going to replace everybody's booklet at the,
That's the ultimate goal, or
At the
in some
meeting.
way, shape, or form, yes.
but if I still get the paper, it comes out usually on Thursday, I get the book on Tuesday. So
Okay.
it'll work, just take a look.
Were you asking if the electronic would be similar timeline? Or,
No, just what this is going to replace,
this,
everything.
Yeah,
This,
no.
this notebook?
the notebook that we
Yeah,
have here.
stretch goal.
That's right.
The goal is to replace all of them. And to speed things up.
Yes, and by the way, if that is, we'd love for as many people as possible to go to this. If that is not an option for you, we will accommodate. We're just trying our best
That's work.
to simplify.
So if you still want the paper copy, you need that.
If you need it.
We can still do that. I don't want it to stress anybody out, and I mean, I say that, and I'm also like a writer.
But I think, what Commissioner Pena is saying, and I agree, as long as we're able to write on it and make our notes, it's just like paper.
And table of contents. Don't forget table of contents.
Do you mean bookmarks, or do you mean table?
Do you want a table of contents?
Or
Yeah, well, you can move around.
I want a
We
button that
like
says-
today.
You wanna
agenda
jump?
item number 20,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
oop, there's agenda
Yeah.
item
Yeah.
number 20, right, that's all, whether it's.
So I
a bookmark-
misunderstood.
Yeah. Yeah, I think table of contents is a general,
I just
and the bookmark is the techie. So like in his case, he brought his, well, we can do that obviously, right? We don't have to use the service.
Yes, it will limit, so absolutely, but I can't support you on that. So we will still have one standing by, should your battery fade out, should you lose connectivity, anything happens to that device, we can't support it. I've been in that support business before, and then I've received calls from their work IT department, that says, what did you do to my, Commissioner Williams's iPad, because now I can't sign in to work.
Okay.
And so we're really limited in what we can do. But if you prefer to do that, I don't see a reason.
We'll go with O-Net.
Oh, Nelly?
We'll stick with O-Net.
One of my favorite. We'll talk about that.
And I mean, I can show you the way that it is typically done. If you click on
Yeah.
that,
Yes.
you
There you
should
go.
be able to go down. And I will tell you, this most recent version did not have that, so don't go to the most recent version. It almost every time does. I think we might have just missed it this time. But typically, you can go to the bookmarks and it'll take you straight. You can click on an agenda item.
Okay, any other discussion points?
What do y'all think?
I think it's great.
I like it. I'll be willing to be a guinea pig.
Oh, we got a
Oh,
volunteer.
yeah, early on.
We got two, we got one, we got three, we got
Four.
three.
I think we got four.
We'll still get paper. I'll
Commissioner.
try, yeah,
I think she should be a guinea pig. Cause you want the paper.
that's right. Some of us, some of us have paper.
You gotta count on
I'll get
Who's
you.
that?
It's just- it's
Commissioner
hard.
Lerner, Commissioner Pena, Commissioner Woodruff, Commissioner Kusner. Anyone else wanna be
We're guinea pigs.
a tribute?
We had a shoulder shrug from Commissioner Hartgraves.
I'm fine.
I'm good.
Training.
Commissioner Miller.
No, we could prop it up for everyone.
I don't know what to do.
We'll do-
Yeah, if everybody.
Yeah,
wants
so-
to do that,
Yeah,
I'll
and
grab
I think
mine.
if there's
We'll do
training,
it-
we all need to be in on it.
The training will be at it looks like the August workshop. So there'll be a true guinea pig situation at the meeting. Beforehand, because that's the day before, and then a real training at the workshop, but we'll still have resources available for
Yeah.
anyone who needs it
Yeah.
during that August meeting.
Yeah.
August
If
meeting
it's,
on
the-
July.
these are really good little iPads here, so they're clear.
And we can show you how to do it, like the bookmarks and all that stuff.
Yeah, we'll do,
Make it bigger, smaller, however you wanna set it up, we can help with that.
sorry.
No, I'm not IT, I'm just promising things.
She could be if she wanted to, don't worry. But we're not just gonna go, here you go. I mean, we'll give you 5-minute cliff notes and stuff to get you up and running, so if you want to show up a few minutes early, we're happy to do that.
Steve, will there also be IT support at the meetings themselves?
Yeah, so it changes for IT a little bit, because right now, my folks generally stick around. If you stick around, the meeting gets up and running, and then I give them a wink, and then off they go. With this in place, I would expect a member of my team to be there throughout the entire meeting, just because. Now, we'll minimize the fact that the documents and stuff will be on the device. We'll minimize connectivity issues, which is generally the biggest issue down in that room. And so Wi-Fi can go out, all that stuff can go out, and it'll impact any team stuff we have going on, but your documents will still be available to you. Okay. And so lastly, I just wanted to point out that, this is important to us, making this work for you. So I don't want to feel like anything's being pushed on you, that we're going to work with you to, make this efficient and successful for you too. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Denise Sample.
I'm gonna throw, I forgot to do this at the beginning, especially if you're down at the other end of the table, this has a really good mic, but you may want to speak up a little bit.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Denise Sample, Director of Licensing, trying to figure out the best spot in the
I'm
room.
out.
Follow Vanessa
I'm
around.
just
I'll be in the
gonna follow
kitchen,
Vanessa's
yeah.
chair. So I'm thankful for this opportunity to kind of explain or offer a little more information about the licensing division and what we do. So our role here is to safeguard the public interest and making sure we protect consumers by ensuring that any license that goes out with Chelsea's signature at the bottom of it, that person has met our minimum requirements. So that's our job, our primary focus. Our population is currently 226,000 plus license holders. And so far this fiscal year, we've received 25,000 initial license applications. So there's not a dull moment in licensing. And so just to kind of give an idea of the interest in this industry, Summer provided me with some up-to-date statistics for unique website page visits, web page visits. Steve can help me with that language later. The second most visited page for the last year is how to become a real estate sales agent. The fifth most visited page is how to renew your sales agent license. And the sixth most visited page is the application status tracker that's live for a sales agent applicant to just check on the status of their application. So it's definitely, we don't anticipate that to shrink just based on the web traffic we're seeing, the application volumes that we're seeing. So a little bit more about who we are and what we do. We review and process all the applications related to individual and business entity brokers. So that's initial, renewal, reinstate, change of designated broker, change of business name, doesn't happen that often, but all of the changes associated with all of the following license types as well: sales agents, all the 3 ranks of inspector licenses, and easement and right-of-way registrants, and that's individuals and business entities. We also answer any questions related to licensing that kind of roll over from the contact center because they require a little more research or, a little more investigation, follow-up, things like that. So with all that, our team consistently meets that processing goal I talked about yesterday in my report of 14 calendar days, so that's a cumulative. That's all the various back and forth contacts. And with cross-training in the last 1.5 years, we've also been able to consistently provide a first response to documents submitted within a week. So we provide kind of weekly status updates, and my team's always pushing by Friday to get within that week of first contact for those documents. So I know that many of you are in the industry and you get a lot of questions that kind of get forwarded to you. People find out what commission you're serving on. So some of the public members, you guys also get questions from time to time related to licensing. We're happy to continue assisting with those. And so what I'd like to do is kind of help you guys offer some tips and maybe a little bit of a myth versus fact information to kind of help you guys with those questions that you might get going forward. So, and a lot of the questions are similar.
Can I
Yeah, of course.
interject real quick? A week ago, we received that complaint from the gentleman about an enforcement case, and he sent it to all the commissioners, right? Is that appropriate? I mean, obviously they don't know about the Open Meetings Act probably, and there's issues and risks there. And so having commissioners with an email available to the public, is that required, or can we mitigate that?
Defer to Vanessa.
So we do, I mean, I don't know that we require internally an email that works for TREC. I think the idea has always been that you're available to the public. The problem is, and I think every agency faces this, is when somebody does what you just mentioned and put everyone on it. And it gets particularly tricky when you have an enforcement case, if it's something that's actually out there pending. Because I know we had another one recently that it had to deal with his application. And so that gets tricky, and our counsel is always, we respond to those, or we direct them to the right place. Depending on what the situation is, we may, say, hey, this is the appropriate place for you to communicate. But generally speaking, I think the openness of those emails and allowing folks to reach out to you is something that we want to maintain, just generally speaking, just so that you are an open and available commission.
So what is the appropriate thing when we get this? Usually I just say, I forward this on to people who can give you the best answer to your question, and I don't say any more than that.
That's a perfect response. Really, any range of responses. If you would like to just forward it on to, Vanessa, or if you have, I'll provide my contact information at the end of the presentation. If you know it's related to licensing, you want to forward it my way, that's also perfectly acceptable. And to your question, Commissioner Pena, I'm more addressing the ones that do get trickled or forwarded to me from you all as commissioners. So, every now and then we get the one that sends it to every email address that they've located on the website. But what I see more often are the ones that kind of come to particular commissioners.
When you mentioned about availability to the public, right? I think there's some risk there with regards to involving a single commissioner in a process of whatever, whether it be enforcement, whether it be procurement, and there's some real risk there that can be troublesome, right? And
Do you mean by roping a commissioner in, like a license holder, just roping someone into that process?
Let's take enforcement, for example, and somebody calls and says, hey, I've got this issue with, my nephew got a DWI, can you do something for him? Is that something that you would want a commissioner doing?
No,
Right.
The correct thing to do is for a commissioner to say, I got this email, and pass it on directly.
Yeah.
So there's an accessibility issue. We definitely want commissioners to be accessible to the public for when it's necessary, and certainly don't want them to have any sort, like, there shouldn't be a barrier to the commissioners,
To
because
me-
certain things should be reported.
To me, availability to the public is a commission as a collective, not one individual.
See, I disagree in the sense that we're all theoretically from geographic areas. And if there's somebody in our area that has an issue with TREC or whatever, and they call me, they'll call me because they know me, they're comfortable with me. And my reply is almost always the same. Thanks for calling, get it an email, give me the email, and then I forward the email to Chelsea, Denise, Jennifer, Michael, whoever needs it. But they feel like we're almost a contact, but I do not get interested. Send me an email, I will forward it. And that's the limit of my conversation.
Yeah.
Because then they feel like they have someone to talk to that they know. And I think as a commissioner, we need that public contact. Does that make sense? And I'm looking at it from a practitioner.
Right.
Because I would not want to call Michael Malloy in enforcement, not knowing him. But if I knew Barbara, I could call her, send an email, and then I forward it. And I get a lot of those. I get probably 4 or 5 a week that I forward immediately to Chelsea. Then I'll try to copy who I think is, and I always screw it up, but Chelsea always fixes it.
You do great, and that's
Yeah.
the response 99% of the time, but then the 1% of the time when there's something that needs to be reported directly to you. Somebody thinks there's fraud, somebody saw me stumbling drunk in the name of TREC, which is not gonna happen.
Not in the name of TREC,
You know.
right?
You're right, I'm very
You won't have
boring,
your
y'all, I'm
badge
very
on.
boring. But, there are some hypotheticals that may come up that may require direct access between you. But most of the time, it would be a direct forward. And then you get to see how we respond. We will include you in a response so that you know it's been dealt with.
Fair enough. I just find it,
I think the
It-
response can be hard. I mean, I think what Chair Kestner just said of like, I will forward your concerns on is super helpful versus like, and Denise, I'm not trying to steal your thunder here, but like, I'm so sorry, I guess you could say, I'm so sorry that this has happened to you. I'm sure there's something TREC can do, or, let me
Get you to
see.
the right
Yeah,
person.
yeah, right. And so like, if there's any, or they're writing to you about an enforcement case and you're like, gosh, this sounds awful, like TREC will definitely take the right corrective action, right?
and that's the other thing about it, is we're getting information about an enforcement case that we could possibly deliberate on.
Right, and so I think for
Yeah.
us, our instruction is like, is to pull out of that immediately of like, thank you for your concerns, I have forwarded this to the appropriate person who's CC'd here, or something along those lines. In that will keep you out, right? Versus, I had all these conversations with Commissioner Pena about my case, and he
Right.
said it's definitely gonna get, dismissed.
Mike's raising his hand over there.
Or sometimes on those enforcement, there's a confidentiality where I need to have like a kind of wall between you and myself. And I can only give you certain little highlight details because you guys may see it eventually, so that's why there's that confidentiality put in there. Until case is closed, then I can tell you guys anything you want about it, so. That's why sometimes we get those emails, you may not know where it is in the process, so just have that in mind if you get those types of emails.
Yeah, and they wouldn't understand that this commission would, there's a possibility that this commission as a whole would deliberate on that case, right? And we can't get involved in it.
He won't even let me get involved in a case that's mine. I do get complaints periodically.
And so that was just my concern, that email is, and it's like the second one that I've seen come through.
Enforcement gets a lot of them, I mean, at least I do, I don't know if the rest of the enforcement folks, but I send them straight, but that's almost every time.
I don't think we get a lot.
Okay.
That's all good information that I wasn't aware of. Thankfully do not get forwarded the enforcement ones.
But she's gonna cover some good stuff in terms of, response, like on licensing questions, which we see a lot of licensing questions, because we're a licensing agency.
And those are the ones that I
Sure.
as the licensing director. So hopefully this will be helpful to you going forward. So first question to ask yourself is, should this question go to licensing? The answer is yes, if it relates to application status, number of hours of credit we've awarded, whether that's from a transcript or course certificates, that's still in licensing's wheelhouse. Getting scheduled for the exam, sometimes there are issues or delays. Fees or education required for a license renewal, and then getting relicensed or reactivated. Unfortunately, a lot of license holders don't like to announce to you all as commissioners that they've expired. So they say, I want to come back, I want to get my license back, I want to reactivate. And so just to kind of give you some keywords that might be used in those messages from license holders. The questions that should not come to licensing, we've kind of already touched on. Anything related to criminal history check or the background of the applicant, that's one that if I get it from you, I am just forwarding it to Mike Malloy to handle from that point forward. And then any questions related to the content or delivery method of a course, that would specifically go to Jennifer Wheeler's division in education. But again, if you forward the wrong people, we will get that all sorted out for you. Don't focus too much on that. So another question to ask yourself is, has this person already been in touch with someone in licensing? Or, are they forwarding a response that I've already sent or someone on my team has already sent? That kind of helps gauge, did they already get an answer from the general counsel email box? What kind of level of attention do we need to give this response? Is this the fourth time we're going to be communicating this information to the applicant, or is it the first time? It kind of helps us gauge the level of response.
Are they forum shopping? And what we do when you forward us is that we all coordinate to see what other communications have occurred. Because a lot of times people will cut out our response and then send it to you with why aren't they doing anything about this? It's very odd.
Yeah, they didn't like my answer, so they're gonna try, maybe they get a different answer from Chelsea.
Yeah.
So we'll run through a little bit of myth or fact. I'll present the most common question that I get forwarded from commissioners, and it's a pop quiz, don't worry, this isn't being graded, but just shout your answer. My license has been expired for more than 2 years, but TREC can reinstate or reissue my license when a special circumstance prevented me from renewing on time. All right, Chair Kestner buzzed in first. That's right, it's a myth. The requirements that a license that's been expired for more than 2 years has to pass the exam and meet current pre-license requirements, that's set by statute. We do hear a lot of really terrible circumstances and really, kind of sad stories and situations that a lot of times I'll respond, if there was anything we could do, I would have you write this all down and explain it, and we would put you in front of whoever could change that, but we cannot waive a requirement that's set by statute, so regardless of the circumstances. That would have to be changed to the statute.
Even if they were in California under another licensing.
That's right. I mean, we get, there's a lot of circumstances, there's, deaths in the family, there's hospitalizations, all kinds of things that go wrong. A lot of times it is people that are on vacation for an extended amount of time and they just missed the deadline, but regardless of the circumstances. We don't feel as bad, but the circumstances don't.
The computer crashed.
Right, but since it's set by statute, it cannot be waived. All right, so another one. I did not know my license expired because TREC doesn't notify me when it's time to renew. Oh. Commissioner Miller is shaking her head, so she didn't buzz in, but I'm gonna give that one to her. That's also a myth. TREC sends out reminders that it's anywhere between 90 and 100 days is the first notice that goes out. There's another notice that goes out at 60 days, and another one yet again at 30 days ahead of the license expiration date.
And the notice is copied to their broker.
It is copied to their broker if they are active. This is another key here, is that missed notices are typically because they've changed brokers and never updated their email address. They are required by rule to report changes to contact information within 10 days. A lot of times we find out when they don't get those notices because they failed to update their contact information. And updating your contact information, Robert's gonna nod his head here, they can do it online, for free, 24/7, anytime they want, log in and update your contact information. They don't have to wait on us to process anything.
That would actually be a great outreach topic.
Oh, yeah,
Remember to update your information.
that's great, yeah, that's a good idea.
The things I will add, every phone conversation that we have, one of the things that we do is we ask them to verify their contact information.
That's
So if they
right,
call us, we make sure that their email address is.
yeah, that's part of every contact is confirming that. And that's great work that Robert's division does to make sure people are up to date.
So does a normal question like that, is it handled by the call center? And so it never has to go all the way to licensing, or?
Yeah, if it's related to a change of contact information, that's one that Robert's.
Or expiration date?
And so that's what his team is kind of feeling out to determine, does this need to be forwarded or can we handle that? Because a lot of times, and correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, it's that they forgot their password, then you log back in and you set them on that path to renew and they're good to go. Alright. So, another one, my broker license expired and all my agents were dropped and inactivated. TREC's gonna automatically add my agents back on as soon as I renew my broker license. Myth or facts?
Yes.
Ding ding, you see the trend, they were all myths. Spoiler alert. So TREC cannot add agents back on. That would be, we would be doing that without the consent and certification of both parties in the relationship. But the upside is that the online sponsorship tool is accessible online 24/7 and it's totally free to add your agents back on. There's no fee associated with that. All right, so are there any other common questions that you received that maybe you want to pick my brain about while I'm standing up here in front of you?
I may end up with more criminals than the rest of the day. Because I've gotten to the point where if they call me and tell me that the application is held up and why, and they're screaming, that the manager's screaming at me saying I can't get this kid licensed, 90% of them seem to be an enforcement issue. And so I just kind of automatically say that, and then I forward it to Denise usually.
That's perfectly acceptable. That is.
I mean, I'll research it to say, oh, yeah, this has been held up a while.
Well, and if you want, I can, show you the application status tracker. That might be more helpful for you. Okay, so is that where you're?
That part.
Perfect. So you're already using that
And
online
that's a good
resource.
tool.
Yeah, because it's just good visuals where you are in the process.
I tried to train my managers to do it too, but they didn't.
All right, well, and just to recap, when you receive a licensing question, if you feel confident enough in this information to say, oh yeah, this needs to go to Chelsea and I'm gonna copy Denise, that's fine. Or if you wanna ask some more questions, like a lot of you who are license holders, you wanna ask additional questions, when did it expire, anything like that, I'll leave that to your comfort level. But also, if you just wanna forward that on, that is perfectly acceptable. And we are happy to copy you on those responses that we send back to the person that's reached out to you directly. So consistency is the key here. With your help and with the way you guys have been handling these questions so far, it allows us to check with other divisions and provide one voice. It helps ensure the highest level of customer service as well to those license holders and applicants, because we're not giving them a different answer depending on who they reach out to. And then, as promised, my contact information is there, and if any of you need a business card, if you like paper, I'm happy to give you that as well. But I'm here and happy to answer any licensing questions. I've been doing this here at TREC for about 10 years, but my prior experience was also with occupational licensing, so I'm happy. And plus, your questions are really where we can also get ideas about going forward, how to improve the process, because a lot of times, and Tony will tell me this, we're so in the weeds in licensing that it's kind of nice to get perspective from commissioners who maybe aren't so in it. If there's no questions.
Thank you, good job.
Thank you.
All right, next up is Michael Malloy, Director of Enforcement. He's gonna talk about some regarding enforcement complaints processing times.
Chairman, pass the clipper.
Oh, no.
Oh.
No, it's my own.
Oh, it's your
Figure it out.
clicker. Oh, wow.
That's the issue. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? So I'm gonna talk about case aging. So I'm gonna walk through like kind of where we are, my proposal to improve case aging, and overall like what our requirements are, or at least the measures that we set for ourselves. I gave a presentation to the executive committee back in April, and you guys may have been able to review that memo. If not, I'm just gonna walk through points on it as part of my presentation. So where are we at currently? Last year we closed 48% of our complaints within 6 months. As you recall, the chair talked about moving that goalpost, so to speak, up to 80%. Currently, we have a measure that we set to do 48%, or excuse me, 60% of our complaints within 6 months. We have not achieved that since 2016, and there's been a multitude of factors in regards to that. The one thing that we have done, we have identified is over the past 2 years at least, we've had a high turnover of attorneys' positions. We've had 6 new attorneys within the past 2 years, and they are the majority of the people that close the consumer-related complaints in our agency. It takes a lot of ramp up, a lot of training for them, and they're really not up to full capacity until after about 6 to 8 months worth of training.
How many attorneys do you have, Mike?
Currently 10. We only fully staffed starting in January of this month. Because of all the turnover and everything like that, we did, I'll show a couple slideshows in a minute, but just as a pretext, we've only added about 3 positions since 2016 in the enforcement division. 2 were basically to address the uptick in background history and fitness determinations. And I added 1 additional attorney in fiscal year 2021. And technically, she wasn't hired until January of 2022 because of all the turnover we had for that thing.
Is there a consistent thread to the turnover, or is there?
I'm going to talk about that in a second. Actually, I can probably address it now. But
He's really grumpy.
Sorry. So we had our salary for attorneys has remained at $75,600 since I'd have to say like 2015, 2016.
The starting salary.
The starting salary.
How's that with all of our competition and also?
The competition is right now currently around, we actually were in the process of bumping those entry-level attorneys up. It's around 80,000 or 81,000. So we recently used merit monies that we have, and we're in the process of moving their salaries up to 81,600. Yes, go ahead.
Just in anticipation of Commissioner Williams' question. We budget as if we are fully staffed all the time. So we have a pretty good pool of lapsed salaries when there are open positions that we can use to address concerns. So now that we're ending or nearing the end of the fiscal year, we can see what our salaries, how much money we have in that pool. And we had enough to basically make this correction. Once we really looked at it and figured out what the budget was, to make this correction within the current budget, so that we didn't have to wait for the next fiscal year.
What's the top out on that position?
Ooh, good question. What we did was we corrected it to get to the level for that salary range, which is an attorney 3 position.
The median range for that, I think, is in the upper 90s. I want to say it's like 93. It's a really wide range. It goes from like low 70 to, I think, in the 90s. I'd have to double check though. Then our attorney 4s does go from like the 90s. I think that range goes all up to like 120,000.
You have plenty of runway.
What is the average service time of an attorney to be with TREC?
Well, I mean, for years, we can get that information, but, you know, ballpark, I mean, we have consistent amount of attorneys for.
So if you look at your staff of 10 right now, what's the youngest and who's the oldest?
By just years of service at the agency, it's, you know, by average, it's probably, you know, 4 years. But I mean, I have an attorney that's been here for 30 years, so it's gonna skew the.
Yeah, but that's
average.
just one, right?
Yeah.
Everybody else is.
I've been here for 13, another attorney's been here for 16, just a couple that are around 10 years.
So do they leave typically to go into private practice or to go to another?
The ones that left, yeah, recently, it's been for more money in the private practice.
You had one go to medical board, you know that.
No, that was GD, that was top B. Yeah.
Oh, you're
sorry.
right, you're exactly right, it was.
I won the return back to the title industry. A lot of times those title industry attorney positions, they rarely open up. So it was an opportunity you couldn't pass. And then an attorney that she went back to serving charities, like rural legal aid. It was like a dream for her, the position opened. I even think for that position, she got a little bit of a bump up in what she was getting paid as well, so. Once I found the full picture and we got the averages, that's, you know, we had the availability for the funds and luckily, I think this should, fingers crossed, will hopefully make us more competitive because, yeah, I mean, even state agencies are probably in the process of outbidding one another because attorney positions are really difficult to fill. Because I know Top B is going through some of those issues right now, so, yeah. Yeah. So on this chart here, this is jurisdictional complaints. I know you see that E1 report every quarter, and you see the big numbers, like last year we had over 7,000 case openings. This just includes stuff that comes in from consumers, and this weeds out the jurisdiction, it reads out if we have jurisdiction or not. This is, so last year we opened 2,162 complaints that we determined that have a jurisdiction. And the yellow bar there is our case aging and how it's been over since 2013. As you see, there's been a progressive jump up in consumer-related complaints, and which caused basically the slow downturn of our measure of 60%.
Does that make sense? That line is the number of, or the percentage of cases that we close within 6 months.
So, Mike, how long does it take for you all to decide if you don't have jurisdiction or not? Is that just?
It's decided within the first 30 days.
You give yourself 30 days to really research.
Well, we do a lot faster than that typically, but we need to make a determination by statute, basically within the 10 calendar days after the end of a month. So basically, it almost becomes 30 days, or even 10 in some cases. So if something came in, we need to give them some sort of notification. We're reviewing it, and then after, and then we say within 30 days, we'll notify what our next steps are. So.
And what percent did you say that are determined to not be within the jurisdiction? I mean, of the ones you received,
So last year, there wasn't that many. We opened 1,262, and overall, we had a total of 2,375 consumer-related complaints. So it's only, a couple of 200. most that come in are not, I mean, that we have jurisdiction over.
Okay, I just.
So this is just an overall, and you would expect that the percentage would be higher for closing, the closing percentage within 6 months, because that takes in consideration the ones that we don't have jurisdiction. So those are closed within 30 days, which obviously improve our numbers overall. But that's not something we really track. This is something I did independently. But as you can see, there's been an upward trend of consumer-related complaints as well, generally.
And with the new online software and that sort of thing, or system that we're talking about, I guess all of that has facilitated probably some of this complaint process, right, over the years. It's gotten easier to do it too, right?
It has been become
Still my thunder
marginally,
bit, but yeah, I think so, yeah.
yeah, marginally easier to file a complaint,
Yeah.
and that will get easier in our new ramp system. There's not much on the enforcement side that is, we use a lot of spreadsheets on the enforcement side. We are not very efficient in terms of use of our database. So hopefully we'll see some improvement there with a new database. Is that fair?
Oh, definitely. There's a lot of data in the system, but pulling it out and being useful is challenging. And my reports that I get that's been designed specifically by Steve's team versus the Versa-related reports, it's fair to say the numbers are kind of squishy because those canned reports, we don't have a lot of control over the data and stuff, so. But I'm gonna try to pinpoint some stuff later on down the road so I can get some better idea and report to you guys about where we're at in case aging, where the pinpoints are, pain parts are and stuff. So we talked about, we increased the base salary to hopefully curb the attorney turnover. Because on average, an attorney closed about 365 cases, or excuse me, not 365, they closed about 165 per quarter. So, no, sorry, 48 per quarter. Like that. So that could have a good impact overall. So I'm proposing increasing the attorney, legal assistant, and the investigator positions are the three positions that touch the complaint the most. And they have the most highest impact in regards to, case aging in general. So I'm proposing adding 2 of those positions at each, 2 attorneys, 2 legal assistants, and 2 investigators. We're also, as part of this process, currently investigators complete 60 investigations per year. We're gonna ramp that up a little bit, and they're gonna, starting in September, they're gonna be doing approximately 66 per year. So in the addition of the 2 additional investigators, that brings in another 120 investigations. My plan is basically, I'm gonna go step by step. So the legal assistant, currently, they have measures to process and review a complaint, hopefully within 10 days of receiving it. They had to handle, like I showed in the prior chart, 2,300 complaints. We have 5 legal assistants. So that's a fair amount of cases they need to review, process, and give to attorneys to make determinations. And that's just part of their responsibilities. They also have to draft the petitions and the agreed orders that you guys eventually see that are signed by Chelsea, the attorneys. So this should help spread out the work a bit more, give them more breathing room, and hopefully we can move the goalpost down for them from their 10-day turnaround time to hopefully closer to, I'll move the goalpost further down to like 8, so we can make some more determinations on aging. What that will do is that will help get that complaint out to the field, to get into the hands of the investigators. Yes, Commissioner Miller?
Are the legal assistants, is it basically admin type jobs, and is there a lot of turnover there, or are they?
No, there has not been a whole lot of turnover there.
They're stable.
Yeah, their salaries are fairly competitive, and It's a lot, I mean, a lot of the legal assistants that we have hired, they've been, people groomed up from the bottom up, or people that are just getting into the industry, so they maybe got their paralegal certificate recently, so, we are
That's what I
looking for that
was
type of position to learn a lot about the legal world,
And
so.
my next question was gonna be, do they have legal background?
We're required for them to have, at least 2 years of some sort of like office legal work. So they may be like a legal secretary, so they're doing like filings that may not traditionally drafting legal documents and stuff, so.
Not paralegal background.
We have it as a preferred requirement, but it's not a mandatory requirement, because, sometimes experience can outweigh that paralegal certificate. But I have seen benefits of having a paralegal certificate and versus like people that, they get the concepts a lot faster than people that don't have that type of.
But your entry level amount for those employees are higher.
Yeah, we'll give them a little if they have that separate certificate. So I have a wider range in regards to legal assistants, where the attorney position is more of like a set. We're gonna offer you this to start it, so.
Hello.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Okay, the complaint comes in, it goes to the legal assistant,
Yes,
and they have 10 days, basically, you
that's
want
where
it
their
out.
method is to look at it,
Okay.
make a determination on jurisdiction, and give a recommendation to the team leading attorney of, here's, we need to send this out to the field because I see these violations, or we're gonna close it because, it's not our jurisdiction.
So it goes to the attorney to determine.
They just double check it.
Okay, and how long does he typically go into?
Oh, they turn it around within a couple of days.
Okay, and then it goes to the investigator.
Well, that's if we make a determination we have a jurisdiction, then the legal system will draft the required letters and then send it to the investigator.
And what, is there a time expectation there?
For the investigators, they're under current measures to complete the investigative report within 6 months of receiving the complaint.
Thank you.
We're making moves now where, I think we're almost to the point where a lot of the investigations that we do are turned in within 4 months. The addition of 2 additional investigators, which would give us another 120 or so investigations per year. I'm hoping to move the percentage of completed investigations, hopefully if I can get 2 additional investigators, then the next year move that goalpost down to 3 months. So that gives additional time for the attorneys to review the matters and make that determination. And if it's a drawn out process, if we have to do formal disciplinary action or whatever, gives them more breathing room in regards to that, so.
The number of investigating dictated by the number of license holders.
It varies, because we have 2 different ways we do investigations. We do field investigations, and then also like for lower level, like if it was like an advertising complaint or something, we'll send out a response to the license holder and say, here's the allegations, there's a complaint filed against us, and they're required to submit a written response.
So it's not dictated by it?
No.
But our case volume
That
is
is gone.
dictated by license, like the number, as our license holder base grows, so does our case volume.
Yeah.
In a couple of ways. That's like consumer complaints, but also on the front end, you'll remember that before your license, you can explore the criminal history process to determine whether or not one's criminal history would keep them from getting licensed. And that process or the number of people asking for that service has increased greatly, which is a little bit of an indicator of who may want to be licensed, right? So it's all a little bit of a snowball effect.
Well, the reason I was asking the question is because If it was somewhat dictated by, we'll have the dollars to pay for the increased staff.
That's exactly right. That with more revenue that comes from more license holders, we would be able to support more staff. And that's really for enforcement and for licensing and then also for customer service. Those seem to be the areas that have the direct connection.
Yeah, actually, the amount of licensees is the driver
That's
for
right.
the amount of
That's right.
attorneys, customer service.
That's right.
Yeah, so on the chart I had originally, there was a big uptick in license holder applications starting in 2016, and that has at least shown a gradual increase in consumer-related complaints. But overall, like the cases we've opened, we were open around 4,000 or so in 2016. We opened 7,000 last year.
Yeah, but
But a good amount of those are the background history.
when they apply for the application, is that charged for that?
The
An application fee?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we're good. I can relax now.
We have all kinds of revenue streams.
Yeah, and there's also another thing that's pre-licensure, we talked about the fitness determination.
Yes.
And that is that we do a $52 fee on that.
Okay.
And actually, I think Chelsea and Tony and I were talking recently. I'm gonna do a little review on apples to apples, if
Yes.
how much we get in, if it matches the fee that we charge for that soon too as well, so.
Like the background checks that you all have to really spend time with don't even show,
They're not on this chart now.
they're not on
This
that
is
chart
just-
at all.
These are consumer related stuff.
40% of the applicants have to have background checks. Do I remember that statistic?
40%.
All of them.
Well, all of them have a
Well,
background
I
check.
mean, they have to be re-researched. Something came up.
But that's the
They'll go
cost.
ahead.
Yeah, they'll get a hit. I don't know if it's 40%. I mean,
It used to be before when your predecessor.
Is that an
was here.
enforcement function or is that a
yeah,
licensing?
yeah, because it deals with looking at legal documents and applying those chapter 53 functions, and it's a more in-depth. I mean, especially, a lot of them were clear because the DWI from 25 years ago, no, but other things do take time, so. If you ever want measures on those, I do have a report I run on how many days it takes to turn around fitness determinations and applications. Where we balance it kind of like Denise, where it's hands-on, where we're waiting for the, but the added addition of the two program specialists we have over the past couple of years, that has, I think a lot of you used to get those emails, why is it taking 6 months to get my thing? I hope a lot of those have kind of evaporated over the past year or two.
That's what it used to be, for sure.
Okay. So there's some added benefits I'm throwing in here, especially at the legal assistant position. There's not a whole lot of overlapping or cross-training, so that will provide some benefits in those positions by adding additional too. Because if they go out of town for vacation or some of that, there's no one there to pick up the slack. So basically, if you're out of town for a week, their cases are going to get a week old. So that's going to be a benefit for that. As we talked about, there's a ramp project coming down the line. One of the features that we're requiring is online filing of complaints. So this is going to be additional convenience to consumers, and I would expect that complaints will go up due to convenience. Talkbeat set up a smaller system, and their complaints have gone up 40% over the past year. So, and
Not
they have a
totally
small.
related to online. There's a few variables to why they've gone up, but we think a contributing factor is that it's really easy to file a complaint.
Who was that?
That's the appraiser side.
board.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you do, we have so many license holders, so one of the complaints I get from people is the convenience factor. They're like, I don't want to print off the PDF form and fill it out. And I don't disagree with that. It is time consuming. So we'll see how that will impact us, but I think having these 6 new positions will better prepare us for, I would anticipate an increase in complaints, at least from some level. Also, for those three positions, I have currently 8 people that are eligible for retirement that can retire tomorrow. So hiring at least 6 people in there would at least level us out if some of those people decided to retire.
This is in the 3 types of positions, right?
Yes.
The legal
The
assistant,
legal
the
assistant,
investigators, the
investigator.
lawyers. Of those pools, 8 are eligible.
So my initial goals is to get us back to 60% cases within 6 months and then start moving the goalpost down from there. And I also plan, at least, starting in the new fiscal year, to start reporting on case aging progress quarterly to you guys. I will say it will most likely dip from the 48%. There's 2 factors that I've considered is we don't regulate residential service companies, and those were in-house investigations, those never went to the field, and they were usually letters that the attorneys wrote that were done fairly quickly.
So that means, like, if our average right now is that 48% are done under 6 months, we will probably get worse before we get better,
Yeah.
because we used to enjoy the benefit of
And we had that
easy case
turnover,
closings.
we had that turnover over the past years for attorneys, and it is really a 6-month process to ramp them up because they have a quota of 16 cases they need to close per month, and it really does take 6 months to get them to that point because the rules and everything, learning about that, the complexities of that. With the turnover, there's a bit of a bubble, so to speak, from last year that we're working through right now because the system basically set up currently to hopefully get most of the complaints closed within 1 year of filing. So we're moving the goalposts back further in this process. So.
Yeah, she made a point about getting worse before you get better. I had a golf instructor tell me I was gonna get worse before I get better. It never got any better, my golf swing. So, but I'm making that comment because to me, you have to have some deadlines. You say you return to at least 60% of the cases closed within 6 months. When would that happen? Because it will get worse, but at some point it has to get better.
Yeah,
You gotta give yourself a deadline of when we're gonna meet some of these.
I'm hoping by next fiscal year, like towards the end of the next fiscal year, we can be close to that.
So next summer.
It depends how soon we can, it depends how soon we can hire the attorneys and stuff.
Yeah, first things first is you gotta get your staff on.
And the current job market, it's tough to.
So within a year?
I'm hoping within a year, yes.
If we're still here in 1 year, you chop off my head,
Well, I know, but
or the year.
we are already moved, like I reported yesterday, we're moving back already. Because that 1 year mark, getting rid of those 1 year cases is improving. And I'm now finally fully staffed at 10 attorneys. And my 10th attorney, she will be getting within her 6-month window in June. So I'll have a full fledged of attorneys closing, within their quotas every month, which is a great benefit.
If you look at your aging, I think you had like 4 buckets. No, all of them are on the first 2, right? I think the first one is 0 to 6 months.
Yeah, so we usually have around 98, 97%
You're
within
like,
that 1 year.
you're there. I mean.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of them creep from that
SOA stuff.
6 to 12, really, after that 6 months.
A lot of the SOA cases are the ones that are on this side.
Yeah.
And those, we're
The
not
formal
gonna spend,
disciplinary ones get messy sometimes.
right, and those aren't gonna be the ones that we have complete control over. So we won't, we're not the ones asking for continuances, and
Right.
we're ready for those cases. So that those don't seem within our control from a performance measure. But the rest of them, which is most of them, are completely within our control. with a few variables. I mean, people have time to respond with documentation and that type of thing. So we'll measure, our fingerprints on it.
My next plan is to do a report to give me an idea of the actual specific aging versus the CAN report that I have. So I can actually do numbers and may have to take in consideration once something's set for SOA. Do we really need to count that during case aging? Because we're ready, like my attorneys are ready. I mean, we may set the hearing 2 months out from when they ask for a hearing or something like that, but, unless there's a weird circumstance, we're not asking for a continuance. They are, because if they're being revoked, they wanna keep their license for as long as possible. And most SOA judges, I know for a fact, they'll probably give you at least 3 continuances. Some will give you even 5, which I think is ridiculous, but.
Commissioner Miller?
One thing I was gonna ask about is it easier to work with a broker that doesn't use an attorney, or those that have attorneys? And do most people, if they get a complaint, do they call their attorney in, or do you work with individuals? Historically, I've done it both
I'd
ways.
say it's 50-50, or maybe even less with people that have attorneys. It really varies, because I remember like when there was downturns in the economy, you're gonna be pro se more than lawyering up, so to speak, because you didn't have that just additional income to hire an attorney. The attorneys, they wanna get their billable hours too, so that will stretch out the process, because they wanna negotiate, or they may wanna do a little bit of discovery, or something like that, that stretches out the process.
The other thing I wanted to tell the people that haven't been here as long as I have, we've had cases that lasted 6 years here at TREC. It wasn't a pleasant one, but.
Right, and that's more on their end than our.
Yeah, but when I started here 13 years ago, we were working cases that were 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah, so
We
what
had a
you're
bad
saying is
backlog
we used to
and-
be really bad at that.
It used to be really bad at it. Which is why nobody.
It's improved, but it can improve further for sure.
So what percent go to
So,
the,
Oh, maybe 2%. I mean, some settle as well, because we'll send something out and they'll wise up at the end and then eventually to sign an agreed order. But if they take it all the way to the day before the hearing, that could be additional couple months that we're sitting around for them to decide if, they want to risk taking their thing, because we offer people a really good offer up front on the orders. If you want to take it to a hearing, I mean, outside of the people that, it's necessary to revoke them or deny them and stuff, the ones that are, reasonable to be mitigated or mediated, you're gonna get harsher punishment if you want to take it to a hearing, because it's not to our benefit, not to use all the tools that we have. So we're upfront about that. It's like, this is a, fair offer, we feel, to, provide sufficient punishment under the License Act. But, if you choose to go to a hearing, then it's probably gonna be worse punishment.
that's your last slide?
Yes.
Other questions? All right, do we want a 5-minute break real quick?
Hour and a half, all right, but.
We will go to agenda item number 5, General Counsel Vanessa Burgess will present the Broker Responsibility Working Group recommendations and update regarding commission initiative related to broker responsibility.
Okay.
Presentations might be longer than the introduction.
Maybe. Okay, I'm gonna start sitting down, but there's a good chance I might jump up. So what we wanted to cover today were 2 recommendations that came out of the Broker Responsibility Working Group's most recent meeting. And you heard a report yesterday from the chair, Chance, about those 2 recommendations to come out. What we wanted to do, and I said this yesterday too, but we wanted to give the commission opportunity to digest these ideas, walk through them, and provide any feedback that we as staff can take to the next meeting and to help craft a rule to the extent that we get there with that feedback, so that, you know, I want you all to have the opportunity to know what's going on and to talk about it before it's like, hey, we want to propose this rule formally, here it is, are you good with that? So I'm hopeful that workshopping this idea a little bit, I know this is an area that's super important to everybody, it's one of the bigger themes at the agency right now. So I want to walk through those recommendations, and then we'll do a little bit at the end just to go give a little bit of an update on generally what's been going on with broker responsibility at the agency and the different tools that we're utilizing to get the message out. So the first one that you heard about yesterday is a recommendation, it's a 2-day response time for sales agents. So currently in the broker responsibility rule, there is a requirement for brokers to respond within 2 days and we're talking parties to a transaction. For brokers, there's also that obligation as it relates to their sponsored agents. We're not going to talk about that as it relates to agents because they don't sponsor anyone. So really this is a 2-day requirement for agents to respond to parties in a transaction. I'm going to say that a little bit generically. And so this would be a rule change. And the thought right now of how that would look is we would take out the part of the broker responsibility rule that addresses the response time to parties to a transaction and create a new rule that would address agents and brokers and that response time as it relates to them. The part where a broker would have to respond to somebody that they sponsor within 2 business days, that would, or 2 days, sorry, that would remain in the broker responsibility rule. And the reason for pulling it out is that it's seems unfair to put a requirement on an agent in a rule called broker responsibility. If you want to get that message out, if you want it to be something that an agent knows applies to them, tucking it in that broker responsibility rule doesn't seem totally fair. So that's the solution that we currently have drafted. And the thought on this is just to increase that response time, to put that obligation on the agent as well. You know, and I'd be interested to hear your feedback just on that idea, generally speaking, because you know, it would be a new obligation on an agent. So it's a little bit of a different path.
I think I said this during the broker responsibility. I love adding it under the agent's duties. I'd like to keep it under the brokers. That way when you're teaching broker responsibility, it is one of the bulleted points. And so I think you leave it there because it's still an obligation of a broker that you're going over broker, your duties include, and then have it in another rule somewhere else for the agents also. I don't see removing it and adding it. I see leaving it and then adding it for the agent's responsibility. And I mean, it's going to be, right now, we get so many calls, well, I turned in an offer, I haven't got a response. I turned an offer, I haven't got a response. And I get it, when you have, 20 offers or 15 offers or whatever, but it's still your responsibility to respond. Your offer was received, your offer was presented, your offer is not accepted. And we take special care in dictating how we respond, but you still need to respond. Because right now, the statute says the seller can do one of 4 things: accept it, reject it, counter it, or do nothing. So even if the seller chooses to do nothing, I still think the agent should have the obligation to convey that to the other agent. It doesn't say the seller has to respond. The seller can do nothing, but the agent should have the responsibility to respond.
Yes.
I completely agree with Scott, and I think this is good, but what is if somebody files a complaint, what's the enforcement mechanism? What do you do?
Well, I think that's a great question on this one. I mean, with any rule, right, we can, if there's a violation, we can pursue it. This one is a little, I think Mike has voiced some concern as to what would a complaint like this look like. If you can prove like a true harm situation, right? They didn't respond and
This other
this
thing happened.
other thing happened and that, you know, you probably got, I'm looking at Mike, but like a bigger case there versus, hey, this person didn't respond. And then by the, you know, once we get to it, it's like, yeah, no, they ended up responding on the third day and that transaction's over, but like, are we still going forward with that? What is enforcement of something like that look like? And these are gonna be the questions that happen with everything that, you know, with any kind of rule change. There's always an enforcement mechanism, but it's how will it practically work both in sort of the reality of it and also in the actual enforcement of it as a licensing agency, what will we require? You know, there could see a huge uptick in complaints on this topic. Is this something that would potentially fall under conditional dismissal process that we're looking at? I don't know. You still have that violation. If you called back on the third day, you still didn't adhere to the rule. And so I think that's something that we would have to really explore from an agency standpoint. And I don't know, you know, I think that conversation certainly can happen in here, and I think it can happen a little bit in the committee. But a lot of times, I think that's something that we have to internally digest as the agency that is practically doing it, because things can sound really, I have a lot of really great ideas on how, you know, my school could do things. And they would be like, okay, you don't know anything about what the things that we have to do and the requirements that we have, et cetera. So I think these are the questions that we're gonna have to ask internally. And as a commission, and what would you like to see? And we wanna bring up the potential issues and et cetera. So I think that's.
And I think also the same, I guess, obstacle we have right now is just reporting anyway. Because for all the people in the business that stomp around mad about a lot of these things, the number that will report them for the reasons we understand, which is, as mad as I am, I'm gonna have to work with them again. I don't want them to, anyway, you know, all this stuff. You know, I don't know how many of those will get reported anyway, you know. And then some of this stuff, not this per se, but some of this stuff may also lapse over into, if they're realtors, into the TR, you know, the code of ethics and standards of practice and all that. Anyway, I mean, it seems like as we start talking about some of these different matters, you know, so will they go both places, one place, you know.
I think enforcement will handle it as it comes. I mean, I'm almost looking at this as almost, you know, I'm gonna use this word, you know, very carefully, a minor infraction like the broker's name not being on advertisement. You know, is that just an administrative letter? I mean, there's a lot of times I can send an email, by the way, John Smith is advertising at Department of 2805, I hope your broker's name is not on the sign, I will make a correction, and it's done. I think this gives the ability to also enforce it among the brokers themselves, but I mean, it might be a small administrative letter or whatever, like an advertising. I think.
That's good.
I think that's something yet to be determined.
Right.
And I don't want to slow this down for that. But when I say, hey, you know, TREC just instituted a new rule that you need to respond within 2 days. Can we hear something? Because on day 2, I'm not reporting it. On day 3 or 4, when I haven't heard anything and they've ignored my email, then that's when it's reported.
I completely agree with you, but going back to this, I think everything we do obviously revolves around this complaint system that's not working because people don't want to get a complaint. So if you get a reprimand or if you get, you know, some complaint about advertising or some complaint about this, maybe there's like a point kind of system, like some people get with traffic tickets in other states that we could do or something, because you can get reprimanded 5 or 6 times and still nothing's gonna happen to you here. So there has to be something to make people want to follow the rules.
Yes,
And be aware of the rules.
So what, I think this would most likely, this is assuming that there's no consumer harm on a, you know, on the timeline. This would be an advisory letter issue. I just confirmed with Mike that it would be the type of thing, you send a letter saying, there's a rule in place that says this and you didn't do it. So that is something that's not on our website as part of discipline, but it is part of the disciplinary history, becomes part of your file. Like if that happens over and over, it would ramp up over time. It's also discoverable in like a public information request. If there is consumer harm, then it would be something that would be included like on the website, which I think is one of the motivators for license holders is, you know, just evidenced by what people look at in our newsletter. They go to the agreed orders. They want to know who's in trouble and they don't want to be on that list. But by having this rule, we also have something to teach to and communicate about, which can be formal education, of course, but it also could allow for a bit of a culture shift. Something to include in your email saying, hey, you know, there's this rule saying you got to respond to me. Why haven't you? Kind of a something to speak to. I didn't mean that in direct answer to your comments, but it seems like that may be, it's additional reasons to apply a tool.
So the requirement, we don't currently have a point system, but you start to put things in file for bad actors.
It's in their license system, so.
Yeah.
Um,
You don't start a point system.
Anything that's not dismissed within insufficient evidence or no violation, if it goes to formal disciplinary action, or if it's in like something that's directly on point that maybe advisor led is appropriate. The first question I ask the attorneys that come to me is, what's their past disciplinary action? How many complaints have they had? I mean, if you're a broker and you've had like, 30 complaints or 50 complaints or whatever, and, you may not get, it really depends. I mean, sometimes the advisor letters may not be directly on point on every given case. You only get so many before it's like, well, you just overall have a problem in regards to supervision.
The thing with the points that I'm concerned about is if I have 5 complaints as a broker and I manage 10 agents, I've got an issue. If I have 20 complaints and I manage 1,200 agents, do you follow me?
No,
So
I
the
see
point
that.
system probably needs to be looked at the agent file, and I think they currently kind of do that without.
I mean, look at someone like NB Elite Real
Well,
Estate
I-
or Realty or whatever. I mean, they have tons of stuff.
Tons of agents.
Urban Realty has tons of complaints, all of these. But it still keeps going on because the broker isn't implicated. So there has to be a better way, and needs to be something more concrete going, okay, let's just look and see how many things are in their folder. Well, there's not a rule, so one person may be one thing, one person may be something else. There just has to be something concrete going, okay, if we get in trouble for this, this is what's gonna happen. Whether it's, you have something for brokerages that have 0 to 10 agents, 11 to 20 agents, whatever it may be.
And that can get problematic because you're applying different standards to different business models there, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was going back to Scott's point, going, people have different number, but there has to be a system. It can't be loosey-goosey.
But right now, enforcement looks at they look at the history and, I mean, if you get the complaint, the same thing 4 times, they're gonna look at that as, evidently an agreed order or administrative letter or a fine did not fix it. So I think they do that internally.
Yeah, it's a ratchet up for sure, but it's less cut and dry. Mainly because if you have 5 advertising complaints or 10 or some huge amount, and you have a number system connected to it, where does that go? Does it go to revocation? We're only talking about advertising. It's like, there seems to be some nuances to it. I'm real curious to know what the other states do with that, to just see how they kind of mix in the necessary nuance, for a better way of saying it.
Yeah. That's why I was asking if Arello also has like a listserv, because that could be a question.
They do, and they also have this digest that basically compares all of our regulations. I'll see if I can figure out how to share
We
with you.
spoke yesterday about, this is not a single solution. It's gonna come in from all angles. But kind of where we're at today, are y'all okay with the 2-day response, trying to add that to the rules?
Yes.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I think everybody in here, whether it's licensing, whether it's education, whether it's communication, enforcement, I think everybody has to have a buy-in to help communicate this.
Yeah.
And on your courses that you approve, and, yeah, I mean, so it's gonna be a joint effort with everybody at the commission. Because this is not gonna solve all the problems, but hopefully it'll bring attention to some of the issues.
And I think that we can, I'm gonna say this about the next recommendation that comes up too, which is the development of the enforcement also has to happen a little bit in real time too, to figure it out and for us to see what that looks like, but getting that message out. And I think you gave a really great example. Hey, TREC, did you know TREC has this rule? Where's my response? That's equipping those in the field to do similar to in Chelsea's article, right? To say, hey, you have a problem here. Or, if to the extent that doesn't work, then filing that complaint and the messaging we can get out about that, et cetera.
And I promise you, the brokerage community, if I get if I go to violations and I pull up where Jan Fight Miller got a administrative whatever on 2 days, believe me, the community knows it. Jan Fight got hammered because she didn't respond within 2 days. I mean, the underground network, Grapevine, it certainly works in the real estate community. And so, yeah, it'll be communicated.
Okay, so the feedback I have is to look at leaving broker responsibility alone, the rule,
Leaving it there.
and creating its own, like an
Adding it for
agent-specific
agents.
rule.
Because I don't want them to think we just moved it from here to here.
Right.
You're still responsible. We're adding more, extending, more, what am I looking for?
Compliance requirement.
Right, more requirements for you as an agent.
You're emphasizing.
Does that make sense?
I
I
would
just
think,
don't want a broker to say, well, wait, they took that out of our section.
I would think that an agent by extension of a broker, the same rules apply down, so.
You know what, I thought that too, but an attorney named Ab Lee told me that was not necessarily the case. I certainly thought it applied to the agents until 3 weeks ago. And I was like, wow, I should read this statute. But it is definitely under the broker responsibilities, yeah. That's what I
So
said.
there's probably a lot of brokers out there who have that rule for their agents in place, right, that policy of,
In the IC agreement.
yeah, hey, you better.
So an agent does not have to respond within 2 days right now.
But the broker does, but it's the agent's responsibility a lot of times, right? I mean, that's kind of the circle effect.
So all offers copy the broker.
I'm curious as to how many cases of these are stemmed from, getting returned my call on an offer or.
This market, it's even
worse now.
enhanced because when you're getting multiple offers and consumers are, the worst thing about getting 20 offers is 19 people are not getting a house.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet they still see it on the website or whatever and there's no response and then they see it pending.
Yeah,
And the consumer thinks, myself as a buyer's agent dropped the ball.
Right.
And this market, it has really become a big problem.
Yeah, because, 19 people are not happy
Yeah,
and mad at their agent maybe, because, so, yeah.
Man, that's a lot to handle. I mean, 19 bidders on one property, you gotta call them and pay your, no.
Well, 73 offers on one
Oh
property.
my God,
it is not,
that's not easy.
it's not unusual.
Wow.
But you should at least have to communicate back with them, your offer is not accepted, it was presented, thank you, or whatever. I mean,
So I think the rule is that they have to communicate every offer to the seller, right? And so, even if it's way down here as compared to the other 70, you still gotta communicate that. Administratively, that's, can be a nightmare.
Yeah, it is. Although I've been telling our folks, trust me, these are better problems to have than some we've had in years past.
Absolutely.
So-
That's just because you're old enough to remember the other ones. I don't remember them.
That's right. That's right. That when you can't get an offer.
Yeah, okay.
You know, is what I'm getting at.
Listings last for 3 years.
Okay, so I'm gonna skip forward a little bit to, keep going. I guess I'm gonna, do I have this power? Okay. That's what a clicker does, is that what you're saying?
It's my computer.
This is magic, except I'm going backwards, guys. Okay. So I'm gonna flip through these because we talked about them. This is another consideration point, which is the current language in the rule talks about a response obligation, and we'll just say this would be for brokers and agents. A response obligation to license holders' principals and license holders representing other parties. What about situations where folks are not represented? Do we want to talk about creating that obligation? Because the language of the rule technically just speaks to license holders' principals and license holders representing other parties.
Why can't you just take out representing and put other parties?
Well, that's the question, is like, do we want to look
Do you want
at
to-
potentially making that change?
Even if they are unrepresented buyers and they present an offer, their name's on the offer, does that make them suddenly a principal in that transaction?
Yes.
So that's covered.
I would think so.
Well, the way this is phrased, it's the license holder, so if I'm an agent, I'm representing the seller, I'm responding to my own
Only.
client.
Only,
Right, the way that it's currently written. So the question is, in your scenario, if there's an unrepresented buyer, we want to put that obligation also on the license holder to respond to that other individual.
if you don't, I'm gonna complain from that buyer that was stupid and didn't have representation.
I mean, yeah, in terms of consumer protection, making that change seems to be an increase there, right? Just to really clarify the rule, that rule language which says, you know, your principal or other license holders in the transaction, that's the response requirement in the current rule. So yes, it may be as easy as, do you drop that and it's just other parties? What Commissioner Leonard just said, I can't speak to that because every time I'm like, no, we could just cross this off, then it's like, no, that you just implicated 14 other rules.
Terribly more
Yeah,
complicated.
exactly.
Even if they're not represented, they are a other party in the transaction, because they're listed in paragraph 1 as parties.
Yeah, they're still a party, but the obligation and rule is on the license holders, is to respond to your principals or the other license holders representing the parties. My laser won't work on this, but I think it will work here, yeah. So it's your principals, the license holders' principals, and license holders representing other parties.
And we can work on the details, it's more like, in principle, do you want to include unrepresented parties?
We have to,
Why would you not?
yeah.
I agree.
You know, if y'all
Yeah.
learned to read in Scurry County, y'all would have read that the way I did, not have any problem with it. Yeah, we have to. Are all parties in the real estate no, because then that includes, yeah, we gotta get it in there somewhere.
You know who's really good at this stuff? Abby, she'll get the right language. Like I said, I will be like, let's just do this, and she's like, no, you've just, destroyed real estate practice.
Forever.
Yeah, forever, and for all time throughout the country. I will have somehow done that, but she'll add a comma and then it will.
Yeah, it definitely needs to be added.
Okay. Okay. And I say that not to disparage myself, but to raise Abby, because her rule drafting is, I mean, her rule presenting, you heard it yesterday.
Some of us in this room are surprised.
So, okay, now here comes probably a little bit of a bigger one. This is one that came out of the groups. This is a different recommendation. We've moved on from the agents one. If you have any additional feedback post this meeting, please feel free to email me on either of these. So the other thing that came out of this group, and this has been a pretty big discussion, is I changed it on my computer, but not on this, I'm sorry. Increased oversight of first-time real estate brokerage activity. And there's a little bit of discussion on this yesterday. Ultimately, the recommendation, it's in the broker responsibility rule, currently is that when an agent conducts real estate brokerage activity for the first time, and I'm gonna say here a type of real estate brokerage activity, because I think, Commissioner Miller, you brought this up, like do we need to tighten up the language definitions and et cetera? Yes, I think so, to make it super clear. And our messaging can make it very clear too. But we'll just say a type of real estate brokerage activity. Currently, the rule says that a broker is responsible for coaching and training of a sales agent who's conducting brokerage activity for the first time, right? And so that could be a buy, that could be a sell, etc. But it's that type of activity the first time. So if it's their first time serving as a buyer's agent, then they've got that supervision. That doesn't mean that the first time what it does mean is the first time they're, on the seller side, they've also got to have that supervision because it's a different type of activity. So the recommendation coming out of Broker Responsibility Working Group is to change that number from the first time to the first 3 times.
How about the first 3 months?
So that gets
Very true.
that starts to get really tricky because not everyone is on the same path. Some folks will do
Dabble
0
in it.
transactions in their first 3 months.
Yes.
The majority won't get in 90 days.
So what is
All the
the
multiple.
experience requirement for licensure?
Not, for an agent, there's not an experience
So I
requirement.
can get an agent's license, go sign up with a broker's sponsor and
And it's that,
and go.
What you're doing.
and that broker needs to supervise you, yes.
So why don't you add an element of supervision, not necessarily,
Coaching,
Yeah, we
supervision.
tried.
Well, that's what a broker is. So is this
supervise, they supervise their agents' activity,
within the system that we currently have?
Yes.
That's what they do.
but that's very specific to
rule,
one
not
transaction,
first
right, for the first time?
And that's the minimum, right? So that what they've done is they've established the minimum amount of that broker's responsibility to provide the coaching and training. I'm quoting that language because that's what's in the rule. When overseeing, when their agent is engaging in their initial transactions. There's
We're moving
not,
it from the first to the first 3.
Activity definitely needs to be defined.
yeah, I agree, and we can tinker with that.
Yeah, because, it's like buy, sell, is it then also commercial, property management,
Well, and
Sales, listing.
sales, listing,
Farm and
leasing,
ranch.
what, ranch, I mean, how far does that?
we want to, and
I mean, it's a question.
no, I think you're right, and we want to contemplate, I mean, as always, every license holder and what they're doing. Did you have something, Commissioner Miller?
Kind of. If you said conducting brokerage activity at least the first time, that would leave it up to the broker to make a decision, which kind of supervision, and does the supervision come? I mean, the other day they were talking about, you had to get a broker to sign off before you ever presented the offer, got it signed by the buyer, and I said, that ain't gonna work. Some agents are gonna come in and hit the ground running, And no transaction is ever the same. So you've got a first-time buyer cash, you've got a first-time buyer conventional, you've got a first-time buyer FHA, they're all different. So, and by the way, sales agents are pretty cocky and confident if they're good, and they don't want them into them. Get away from me, kind of deal. So you're dealing with that, but as long as the broker will supervise and not pay unless he has all the documentation, he holds the commission. And that's the way most of us handle it. We don't get all the documentation, we're not paying you, kid.
I don't want to open up a can of worms, but I get back to Leslie's, but how are you gonna enforce this?
It's gonna be complaint driven.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, I'm looking at it, if you get a complaint and you look at the file and they have not had the supervision, then I think you come down on the agent and the broker.
What is a supervision marker? That's my question.
What does it look like to supervise?
That's what we've gotta look at. You know, I think right now, this would be a little bit similar to what we just said. I think there's a lot of messaging that can go out about this to sort of ramp up the importance. I think it would be another tool in Mike's belt. I've been stealing that phrase from you, and I like it.
Toolbox.
Yeah, or toolbox, there we go, even better. But that Mike could use, I think normally in a situation where like something has gone, you know, really astray in that first transaction, you're gonna go under like a negligence standard or something along those lines, right, Mike?
Correct.
And so this would be something else to add to that. It would be calling out the importance that this commission is placing on these initial transaction and that supervision of those first time activities or first 3 times. Yes, Mike, sorry.
I will bring this up, and this is just me being the attorney that maybe would be on the other side of representing or defending a license holder. If you do move the bar up, they would, if they had documentation, they could show that like, look, I mentored them or coached them through 3 transactions. I'm not, you know, I'm less liable over that. For me, I look at it from a perspective, as I'm forcing it, the consumer is harmed. If you're at 1 or 50 coachings or whatever, I'm looking how much has been harmed and how much you messed up. But it is an argument that I could see a smart attorney making, which other attorneys have made in regards to broker supervision at SOA hearings, saying, look, we provide all these classes and all this stuff, we're doing enough. And yes.
He didn't do what we told him to do.
It's him, it's not us.
Yeah.
So by moving this up, I'm not gonna take in really consideration, because I'm gonna look at consumer harm overall. But it is something that someone probably, I mean, a smart attorney, if I was on the other side, I would definitely argue this and say, look, they're setting a minimum and they've even moved it up. And my client did that, so they're not as responsible as you think they should be. The commission obviously would have to say further down the road, if the PFD came out saying, no, they need to be held responsible. But it's just, I'm playing devil's advocate, I'm just. Sure.
Yeah, well, you're gonna be the one who applies it.
Yep.
That is at least an argument to add the words "at least" to the 3 times, right?
And I will say, currently the rule says at a minimum.
Okay, there you go.
So it's already got that part, so I don't think we would modify that.
You would use at a minimum.
We would keep
Right.
that language.
Right.
If we said, currently it says at a minimum, sales agent has to receive coaching and training for the first time, if they engage in that activity. So if we did switch that to first 3 times, we would keep that at a minimum language.
Historically, if you talk to the E&O carriers across the country, and I've been to those seminars for 30 years, it's not the first time agent that gets the complaint. It's not the first time agent that has done anything really wrong because somebody's watching them because they're new. It's agents who have been in the business 7 years or more across the nation.
That's what our data shows as well.
Yeah, which is why having this stuff, and I think in recent years, you've done a good job of putting this into the continuing ed, you know, the points that, you know, are become more topical or new because it does help for that reason. The other thing is, in my experience, you know, I don't know that it, or my question would be, I guess, you know, if there's a problem here, you know, it's not gonna really matter anyway, whether you did the training right or not. I mean, if there's, you know, back to the consumer harm, you know, does it really matter if you're the broker and by statute and other ways you're responsible? I mean, does it really matter you know, at the end of the day, right? Certainly doesn't in lawsuits, I'm pretty familiar with. You know, nobody says, well, you tried really hard to train them and they, I mean, it's still on you, you know, I mean, so, I don't know, I'm just asking that, you know, that question because it is true. I mean, it's the experienced people that, I mean, yes, new people make new people kind of mistakes, but usually, you know, you're there, you can fix them.
It's the older ones that bend the rule.
Well, you know, they get, you know, well, or sometimes it's like, well, that wasn't the way I was taught to train, or, I mean, that wasn't the law when, and that may be true in some cases, you know, when I got, you know, because maybe after they've been licensed however long and been active, that doesn't mean they've necessarily beyond whatever continuing ed is out there. These people, they've developed their own way of doing it, right? Which could be right, wrong, and
Mark, in your office, what does it look like when an agent comes there for training? Like, we know, like, some of these newer pay-to-play places have nothing. Some of them don't even know they're a broker, but I know in your agency, they do. So what does it look like?
well, I mean, when they come with us, you know, they are going to have, they're going to be assigned, you know, they have an office manager, probably a coach in there, assistant manager. They're going to have to take our training, you know, which if, you know, over and above whatever the, you know, state requires. And if they don't, then we're going to ask them to leave, you know, and say, hey, it's just not for you. There are places you can go, obviously, but, you know, this isn't what we're about. And so, you know, some don't, you know, I mean, but, you know, our system is set up where it's like, when you get that first opportunity, call your coach, you know, because honestly, you can train the heck out of people, but until they get their first opportunity, the practice is, you know, back to every one of them's a little different, right? And so when you get ready for your first listing appointment, call us. You get your first, you know, getting ready to write your first offer, call us, because that's the only way to really.
And if they don't call you and you get their paperwork, does something happen? Is there?
Well, then that's going to be, yeah, a trip out behind the barn, you know, so to speak. And it's like, you know, this isn't how we roll, right? And of course, they're not going to get paid back to the, you know, either because chances are they're not going to have all the right stuff, or it's not going to be completed accurately, et cetera. So, so yeah, I mean, it's because in today's environment, it's just too, it's just too, you know, legally risky. But on the other hand, if you're really about doing the right thing, which we think we are, you can't allow it.
What if you don't give them the license until after, say, 6 months of working underneath a broker?
Well, now we've come full circle to mentorship, which.
Well, that's, and you know, that's another, I mean, hey, maybe that's a good conversation to have, but I mean, in the present environment, I mean, you know, it's.
But Mark, your firm
Provisional.
is, there's so many new types of firms that aren't following these rules.
Well, that's true. I mean,
Absolutely.
That's the problem.
And I mean, I talked to either virtually or in person to the class once a month. It's you know, it'll be 30, 40 people in there sometimes. And I just tell them, hey, you know, you made a choice, you know, hopefully, because here's how we roll, essentially, you know, and hopefully this is what you signed up for. And I say, If not, this would be the time to, you know, like deplane or whatever. If you're not going to Houston, this would be the time to get off the plane or whatever. And so,
Getting back to
Yeah.
this, I mean, at least first time or 3 times per transaction. I know that has to be identified. I really think a lot of the intent is to help communicate not only to the brokers, but also to the agents what they should expect. And there's a lot of brokers that have a lot of agents that do it really correct. And there's brokers that have no agents or some agents that do it wrong. I really like this in just the fact that we can piece it together and communicate it, not only to the brokers, but the agent, this is what you should expect. And I'm not for sure how to define the first 3 activities, a listing, a purchaser, a lease, or a tenant finder. Dolores says, you know, relocation. I mean, I think that's up to the broker. But right now, it's just 1, and I see their point in raising 3. And going back to Commissioner Pena's thing, as far as, you know, so many transactions before you renew, there are agents with licenses that will never sell a house. Michael Malloy has a license. You know, I have
If
2
he's selling a
people-
house, he's in trouble.
Yeah, I have a personal property manager. All they do is take photos. But they do licensed activity, so they have to have a license, even though they will never buy, list, or sell a house. So we have to be careful with these rules that we don't infringe on the business model like that. There are people that work in teams. But I like where they're going. I'm just not sure how to get there. As far as broker, you have more responsibility than the first transaction. And y'all bring up great points. So, I mean.
yeah, because right now, in theory, you've got you've got responsibility for everything they would touch, right?
Right.
I mean, so that, and like, it's increased oversight, which I guess that's what we're talking about, which, hey, that doesn't offend me, I mean, you know, at all. But, you know, it, like you say, devil's in the details.
Yeah. But the way I'm reading this is I have to have more oversight over a new agent than I do Jackie York that sold 94 houses last year.
Yeah.
My oversight has increased over the first 3 transactions.
Right, and so that.
And after that, I mean, I'm still gonna watch them, I'm still responsible, but I certainly don't have to Zoom with Jackie or sit with Jackie in the office.
Well, that's right. And I think that's the critical piece is it says, hey, you know, yes, you have ultimate responsibility anyway, but for the first, you know, however defined period of time here, you've got even an additional level of responsibility to have provided.
And I think that's where they're trying to go. And I hope everybody can see that. It's just, I'm not sure how the language would be put to get there.
You mean in terms of that there's still you still have to supervise after the first 3, or?
Yeah, I mean, we're ultimately responsible for everything. It's just saying, you know, you're gonna increase supervision and coaching on the first 3. Does that make sense?
I think that's why that at a minimum language is in there. It's that additional level of it's at a minimum when they perform it, they need to receive coaching and assistance. That is different than your general obligation to make sure that things are going,
There's
right?
nothing in the rule that says they have to have a mentor.
Right.
If they don't have to have a mentor, because the broker can be the mentor.
Right. That's right. And it's really, it's again, that language is receive coaching and assistance from an experienced license holder competent for that activity. So if it's something that you as a broker, you know, it's not something that you think you could provide the level of coaching and assistance that they need, you know, you could access another license holder if that's delegated supervisor, et cetera. It doesn't, however that's set up for you. But I think this idea is really, I mean, what this does in the rule, and I think what the increase to 3 times is trying to address the first time activity. And that first time activity could come, we talked about this yesterday, 10 years into holding a license. You could shift your practice, right? So it's not just new agents.
Right.
You know, the new thrust on unauthorized practice of law, and Mickey Lackey is the one who started this conversation. And what I think confuses people, and I'll tell you, it has confused me. I really thought that the new rule said we had to appoint mentors. I had fought mentorship and made my managers be the mentors for years and years and years, because I kept having to have fights with all these companies that we would buy, and they'd have mentors, and the first thing that came out of the vote was either dress code, or the first complaints were, are you gonna set us up a dress code? And the second one was, I don't wanna pay my mentor. Well, then you have the fight over how much I have to split the commissions with the mentor, and when we increase it, I'm seeing that as it's a fight now. Some agents don't think they need the mentor. We're requiring it. We've started requiring it since this new regime came into place about, and it's in broker responsibility. It talks about mentors. You have to have a mentor. Again, my managers get paid a salary, so they were the mentors.
And I think that's exactly
But I
right.
think we need to say that. That is not really realizing what the law says versus what really is expected.
So if I'm understanding correctly, that a mentor is almost a different category.
Well, let me ask you, would coaching and mentorship, could it be mentorship instead of coaching?
So long as I think we're.
Coaching is looser, and that's what I would prefer, just to say
You like
coaching.
coaching better?
Well, maybe the messaging ends up being, I'm kind of making this up, but playing around with, explaining, hey, like coaching and assistance, which can sometimes be known as mentorship, however, which at your agency or your whatever may be known as this, what it really means, from TREC perspective is this, something, I'm making that up, Summer's probably like, stop writing things, but we can work with that. I think that's really helpful to know, right? And we got there when we had this discussion, broker responsibility working group, is I had quite a few people give me their definitions. This is what a mentor is. And it all ended up being the responsibilities that are already for a broker or a delegated supervisor. One of the main ones being that broker responsibility course. And so we really boiled it down in that conversation. We didn't even use the term mentor, like an official term mentor. It was broker, delegated supervisor, just whoever is equipped to do that level of, that competency to provide that coaching and assistance.
But nothing at this point is a written form, right?
Right.
Okay, so could you put, to her point, just put something in a defined description of which each one of them is, and then go with that?
Like the type of activity or
Yes, the type of activity that defines each role.
And I'm trying, and I'm looking to Abby because I know that there are definitions, maybe it's just in statute of the brokerage activity. I think we have to look at that and see, we can bring language forward that addresses that issue. I will say we have not looked at it yet, but I think that's a good point.
So there already is, I guess maybe I should know this, but in the statute, there is language that defines it more.
So it's under the definition of broker, but that definition has about 10 different subpoints, and it lists all the things that is considered what a broker does, brokerage activity.
So, Mark, like in your brokerage, how many designated supervisors do you have? Because you have a lot of agents.
Well, that's a good question. Well, every one of our team leaders is, I mean, if you have a team, you're
Right.
designated supervisor, so I'm sure that's probably 50.
Because
Then we've got, designated office managers, probably another 25.
if you look at some of these agencies now, they have tons of agents. They have one broker and maybe one supervisor, or there's a branch without a branch manager and everyone's running wild. So, I mean, that could be a place to start too, that would help with some of this, because you have 1,000,001 LLCs and teams, and like one place they call them groups to get around teams, that don't have designated supervisors. So, I mean, maybe you start looking at how many people these designated supervisors are supervising.
That's gonna be a can of worms.
Well, you're again getting into business models there, I
Yeah.
think, which can get,
So do we like where this is heading? I mean, I think the biggest issue is the language and wording it. I love Commissioner Miller saying coaching or assisting. And Michael might get onto me for this. I truly don't believe if I'm increasing the coaching and assistance for a new agent, it necessarily has to be a designated supervisor. It might be co-listing with an experienced agent.
Right.
I am still increasing my oversight. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I think we need to be careful narrowing it down to either the broker or a designated supervisor. Because a lot of our new agents, their first listing, they co-list with a very experienced agent. And all communications is gone through both of them. That is our oversight. Does that make sense?
yeah,
And that's, it's not a mentor, it's a co-listing agent and they walk them through the transaction.
it's a license holder, who's competent for that activity.
Yeah.
Which is what the
And
current
it's in
rule
this- it's in
language
this-
contemplates that, that's right.
See, but the way I see that, it's not coaching, it's supervision.
Agreed.
I mean, I think.
I just don't like the word mentor.
I would do that.
Coaching, I think, is equally
Fights.
less, how should I say it, more like,
I've had a lot of coaches, only one mentor in my life.
You were
That
a
makes
coach.
sense.
to me, mentor and coach seems like
A little ethereal.
something that you would do because you like someone, right? You mentor someone, you coach someone, as opposed to a supervisor. I'm required to supervise. My statute requires to
But-
supervise my CPA.
But if I call Jan Fi, if she's done 90 houses and Barbara comes to work for us and they co-list, and I refer her as supervisor, I probably need to have her marked on TREC as a designated supervisor, and she's not.
Supervisor is a little bit of a magic word, so it's like, how do we get to that
Yeah.
same meaning without triggering the magic
Yeah,
word that means?
Because I'm not designating her to supervise agents, I'm designating her to help Barbara get her first listing done and through the
see, but
assist.
I think you're commingling supervisor versus supervision, right? And a 20-year experience realtor, right, that you say will co-list with something, that's supervision.
But
Not-
agents are a personality, and Jan's gonna say, like, hey, I'm a supervisor for Scott now. No, you're not. I have not designated you on that box.
Right. But she's still fulfilling that function as a supervisor.
No, she's not.
Well, then why would you have?
Because in a brokerage, you have to have a designated supervisor. You designate her to be a supervisor, to supervise any agent in there theoretically.
Which
And I'm
is
gonna
why
be-
this is coming up, right?
Right,
And
which
so-
I'm gonna be very careful. If you're co-listing, you're helping them, assisting them, coaching them, but I'm not gonna use the word supervisor just because of the TREC guidelines.
I want to go back to,
Does that make sense?
just because the word mentor has been put in broker responsibility classes for the last 4 years, I now appoint a mentor, carefully chosen mentor, to handle every new agent that comes to our company. And then I still have the arguments about the cocky little agent that says, I don't want to pay that person. And so we've restructured commissions, and you do all this finagling around the fact that one word was put into that course 2 years ago. And I thought that was the rule, and I never bothered to read the rule.
Well, that's really helpful, as we're developing that course, right?
Yeah.
And I think we can, we will look at that language and see that, we wanna make sure we're not implying a new position almost, right?
All my mentors, by the way, now have to go to broker responsibility. And our administration people also have to remake them.
Yeah.
Go to broker responsibility. And they're all licensed now.
Yeah, we don't wanna trip up any of this employee and contractor language that
Exactly, it's tough.
exists over in other arenas,
I think everybody likes it, I just think y'all have to come back with a magic language.
We'll work
Yeah.
on it.
No, we will.
And
how
I
it's
guess-
going to be enforced.
Question I've got, in brokerage responsibility, or brokerage, or in the responsibility working group. I mean, so the idea, I guess, came from we need to raise the bar, right? Or did it come from, these new people are creating problems?
Bro, that's what I'm going back to.
Maybe both, right?
It is
I'm-
both.
Look how many more licensees we have.
Yeah, right, which I agree. I agree with both of them, either way. I'm just curious, I mean, to me, I think the consumer deserves a better, product in many cases, not all, obviously, in many cases than what they may be receiving. And so I'm always going to be about raising the bar, I mean, because I think that, hey, we got 200 and what is it, 26,000 licensees. Seems like, we got plenty of people out there. I mean, we need to be able to, but what we don't talk enough about is what's the consumer getting, right? And so I think that anything that moves it in that direction is a good thing. Now, the devil's in the details, and it is dicey, but hey, how can you not be for that? I mean, given our mission.
Vanessa, Chelsea, Abby, is there enough consensus to kind of know where we want to go and get that language as far as?
I think so. It seems like I'm getting that the 3 times that increase from 1 to 3 seems agreeable. I'm gonna get into a secondary component of this, so maybe it's not necessary at this point, I'll see. And we're gonna tinker with this brokerage, the brokerage activity, and we'll look at the mentorship language and broker responsibility. I will say, and I'm gonna just preview this, and we'll see what happens with all of this. Whenever we do a rule change and we're increasing things, we need data to back it up. As I think Commissioner Miller, you mentioned the E&O world, our complaint statistics are similar in that you're seeing issues with people in the 7 to 8 year range. So I don't know, because I'm not out in the world and seeing what's going on with new agents. Seems like around this group, we're hearing, hey, we're seeing people that are, out there and making mistakes on their first transaction. This is an attempt to do that, but I don't have the hard data. This will likely end up going to regulatory compliance, et cetera. We will work on that, but I feel I have to mention that in terms of what this will look like, because we can't, if it's a rule that goes to regulatory compliance, they've got to sign off and approve it, and they have a series of questions they'll ask us. And I will not be able to turn over, look at all this enforcement data I have showing this is the problem.
It's more like a groundswell of conversation around, people don't know what they're doing, you need to fix that. And that's pretty ethereal. And I don't know that this change is there's no silver bullet or magic pill, as you called it yesterday. I do think this can move the bar. It also, to change the rule for people who aren't following the rules is a bit circular. So there's got to, there has to be other efforts related to this. Education being one, general communication being another, that communication helping encourage a changing culture among license holders. License holders need to call each other out. And then also there needs to be confidence in our enforcement system.
And to the enforcement, so let's say a complaint's filed for whatever reason. Part of, and you're reviewing the file and, the complaint and all. Could it be that one of the questions that you look at is, all right, the supervision, right? Was this, could you even though that wasn't what the complaint was filed on, right? It was filed on Johnny, Susie, whoever
Yeah.
did or didn't do something. I mean, could it be that a standard part of the review is, all right, let's, what was this agent, and I don't know if this is back to newer people or after some date, or, you know, I'm not
Or
sure.
anytime, is there a broker supervision issue?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, and is there any, and I'm not really saying we need to have another form or anything, but is there, if you're interviewing the broker at that point, which you would be, obviously, in a complaint, can you satisfy us that you had a, you know,
They already do that.
yeah. And so if, and I mean, they ask me that question every time, so I mean, I assume that, of course, fortunately, I've got Diane McCoy that can always answer that question. But, you know, then that becomes, you know, but I mean, they'd be asking, have you done it for the first 3 times or whatever? I
And
mean,
where's your documentation?
yeah, I mean, so that could be a way back to compliance. It's more of a backdoor thing, but I mean, yeah, yes, people could file a complaint on it, but I mean, that could be a way that it also gets checked, you know.
Yeah.
It would be.
But if the an echelon of a hierarchy, you've got the mentor that's helping people fill out the contract and maybe going through the presentations on both sides. But then the designated supervisor is the manager of the office, and they're gonna sign it, and they're gonna make their jobs on the line if they don't make sure all the paperwork's there. So at what level are you gonna slap people if they can't show that? I mean, how do you know that that mentor didn't do it?
Right.
Or not?
That's a
So
good
we're not
question.
gonna call them mentors now.
Yeah, so good question.
And I think, you know, we're gonna go to broker agent relationship, like we're gonna stay our course in terms of that enforcement. This, I think the messaging can be, hey, especially with this first time stuff, but also don't forget, this is always your responsibility. You know, your supervision responsibility isn't lessened at the higher level. And so I just am gonna note this is a very similar conversation we just had, which is documentation associated with this is tricky. And the example I give is, so for broker experience, we have a form and it's filled out and you turn it in once you're at, I'm gonna use the old number, 3,600 points, I can't remember, yeah, 3,600 points. I got my 3,600 points, I'm done. There is no done here, because not everyone is going to try and do, there's no goal of, I've gotta get every type of brokerage activity done. I may only do one type for my entire life, I may switch at 20 years and start doing something else, I may do 3, you know, whatever, there's no end game. So, there's been a lot of ideas tossed around on documentation. You know, is there a space on the contract? Is it, where does it start? If you get to the contract, you're too late, all of that stuff. I think those are all really relevant considerations. And then we have to consider it from a licensing regulatory agency standpoint of what do we need and how would we process it and where would it enter? Is it just upon complaint that we're trying to get that documentation? Since there's not an end game, it can't really be part of a licensing function. So we are looking at that. I don't think that hinders the progress of the rule itself. But I just want you to know that we're looking at that. We want to come up with something, and if maybe it's something that it's like upon request, you've got to give us documentation. Maybe we have something out there that folks can use. In the event they want to, of like, hey, there's this form, it shows that, TREC's put on, it shows I signed off on this, this, and this, and we keep it. We'll look into all of that, because, I think this is key to Commissioner Lerner's point of how do you enforce?
Yeah.
And we want to get that right.
Yeah, because generally that's the crux of a lot of these conversations is what does enforcement. And I guess one question, because this whole issue of anonymous complaints and why it doesn't make sense after, from the perspective of, somebody says, well, of course I didn't do that. Well, then what? So that's where it kind of breaks down. But I'm just curious, how many anonymous complaints on things like advertising or things where you wouldn't have to be, where you could just, shoot a picture of the brochure or the billboard or the, the website.
We got one,
So,
and E&O didn't cover it, and it cost the agent $3,000
Yeah.
to find.
so we do get those
Well, we don't do anonymous complaints.
at all. You
No.
can't do one.
We can't, right.
The
but
realtor,
The real-
realtor code of ethics, you can do some anonymous complaints, but that's,
Got it confused.
Yeah,
we don't
No.
have that statutory authority.
I think, no, and that's a question that comes up a lot, and we'll look at it, this is similar to, starting to say, it's hard to prove negative, it's hard to prove
Right.
something didn't happen, so it would be really helpful for us to develop something, and we are looking at that, and I think we've got a lot of ideas on it, and now we need to see, okay, what would work?
And how are you gonna get the data to support it?
I'm not certain that we need a spreadsheet. We've never had data to support a lot of our regulations that way, just because it's so impossible to get. We can show what we have in enforcement. We can talk about the requests for increases in broker responsibility. And go from there. I mean, I think that the regulatory compliance will basically just want to know, why are you doing this? What's the need? And we can answer that question. It's close to impossible to answer with numbers.
And I will always say this, I'm gonna point out where it's gonna be hard, where we're weakest, and it's not because I just love getting in on the negative, it's just because if I don't, and then this comes up, and everyone's like, well, why didn't you tell us that? Like, that
It
sounds
is kind of
really
your role
relevant,
in this
right?
whole.
Yeah,
I'm a real
part of being a lawyer,
bummer, right?
The lawyer always has to play that role.
Delightful on the inside, but like a bummer professionally, and I'm okay with that. But I just bring that up, it may not, the questions I get may be something else. I'm basing this off of the questions I've received in the 2 inquiries. This is a new system, regulatory compliance. We've had one that was like a preliminary and one that was a full-blown one. And so I'm basing it off of that. And some of it's gonna go back to do they have the authority to do this? And if they do and there's room for it, then okay, it seems, so we'll get there. I would just be remiss in saying, slam dunk, we got this, because I see that, I see the enforcement data as, it's also informative, right? Because we want to look at, how do we reach the 7 to 8 years, right? How to, it seems like, yes, there's this, but maybe we also need to be getting that messaging out, doing something to that effect, and I know we're working on that, but it's this stuff is there's so many layers to it, there's so many different types of license holders, et cetera. But we can take this feedback to broker responsibility, and we'll bring some draft rule language to broker responsibility working group. And ultimately, it is my hope that we will come forward with draft rules at the August meeting, which will time perfectly with our quadrennial rule review.
Yes.
So, broker responsibility, there will not be a silver bullet to this. But I think we can etch away at the calls for increasing the standard on broker responsibility. Of course, we're always looking at whether or not new business models our rules can be applied to those new business models, but we don't want to throw new rules out there to prohibit new business models unless it's impossible to protect the consumer under a certain business model. But we're not going after certain types of businesses, right? So other ways, I just want y'all to have kind of a complete picture of other ways that we're trying to etch away at this are just a few of these bullets. We're doing a rewrite on the broker responsibility course. That will come before you for your review. Hopefully that rewrite will be an improvement and will provide some realistic coaching for folks on what the expectation is for broker responsibility. There's also a lot of conversation within ESAC about where we can infuse that broker responsibility subject matter, both for those being, for pre-licensure, when you pick a broker, what should that broker look like figuratively? Look at more than just how much you're going to make, that sort of thing. We also will, have changed the way we communicate with our license holders. This bullet says communication efforts to increase the confidence of enforcement, but also equip our license holders on what the standards are for broker responsibility, both for sales agents and brokers. I mean, a lot of this, you hear these, even in one of our advisory committee meetings, we heard license holders say, I didn't know we as license holders could file a complaint. That's a problem. Because they absolutely should be filing complaints. You also hear sales agents saying, I don't even know the name of my broker. That's a problem. You should.
That's okay.
Just kind of getting out there and educating folks on these anecdotal issues. Next, upcoming, I believe in August, you will see a draft rule that creates this conditional dismissal option in enforcement. This isn't the best way to describe it, but that provides a more shallow option for enforcement. That if there is an easily fixable issue, that we send a letter saying you're in violation of this rule. If you can fix it within 10 days, all will be well. That scenario. There's also a legislative component to that we can talk about, but you'll see that rule in August, and I think that will help improve our confidence in enforcement just by creating an option that's not easy for all parties. We also plan a survey for the summer over many subject areas to help the legislative process, to explore the option of eliminating the handwritten checks that are submitted to the office, to just check the pulse of our license holders. We can bring up broker responsibility in that. When we do that, it's important to me to ask questions that we can then do something about. I want to manage expectations on how much we can address broker responsibility. The responsibility is on the entire professional community. And so I don't want to skirt our responsibility in that, but I also want to manage those expectations. When you send out a survey, you're asking questions, but you're also telling people a lot by what you're asking. And I think that's important for us to remember. And then lastly, and this is a big one, but it's probably a little ways down the line, and that is a potential consumer campaign. This agency has never before planned a campaign, which would be expensive because it's very hard to capture the consumer, right? But to educate the consumer on what they can expect from our license holders. That would be, I think I've given you this example before. It's a little bit like a get out the vote campaign. It's a pretty broad brushstroke of in order to capture that audience. But if we can equip the consumer on what they can expect from our license holders, then that raises the bar on broker responsibility in a way that's very clearly part of our role as a consumer protection agency. That would probably be a couple $1 million to solicit a firm to help us with something like that. And so I'll tell you that my timing on that is to see what it's going to cost to do this ramp project and see what our strategic reserves look like after that. But I think that would be, I wish Commissioner Pena was here for this comment. I think that would be a really good way to spend down resources that we may need to spend down in a way that just directly supports the consumer. That's probably like a mid-fiscal year 2023 goal. Once we have some details to that, we would come to you for like a budget amendment and for some details on that. Okay. Last topic, y'all. Do we need a break? Is everybody?
Tony.
Are we doing?
y'all just wanna skip a break and get
Let's
through
power
this?
through.
Yes.
Good.
All right.
You thought I was kidding when I said we might not get to you.
There's a few of us that are gonna talk on these. Tony's gonna start with a few items. I've got a few items. Vanessa has a few items. This is collectively just, the beginning conversation on plans for the legislative session. Session will start in January of 2023, so it is before us. It will feel like tomorrow. I will tell you that within our agency, we do not lobby. We cannot lobby. We do inform. And that doesn't mean we just have to sit on the sidelines. If there are things that the agency recognizes as potential needs for the agency to improve what we do, or how we administer, or how to improve the consumer protection function, then we can inform the legislature of what those changes would be. And so some of what you'll see is that, and then other items are just things we're watching or that we'll work with stakeholders on. So, Tony.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to address the first three items on this list of legislative initiatives. All three of them are included in the strat plan that you addressed yesterday. They're part of the redundancies and impediments list on that. We utilize, as an agency, we utilize that particular portion of the strat plan to kind of give us a base of some of the legislative initiatives we want to talk and just put it out there as well for other people to know about. But I'm going to address the first one, which is the Repeal the Recovery Fund. For those of you that were on the commission last session, this was something that was brought up last session. We actually had a bill filed to do it. What it would do, so inspectors are required to carry E&O insurance. And that happened in 2007, I believe. Since that went into effect, that is the primary source for consumer protection for inspectors. People utilize inspector insurance. They don't go to the recovery fund. The recovery fund is currently underutilized because of that. The last time we had a payout on this is the inspector recovery fund we're talking about, was in 2017. So because of that, repealing it makes sense because there is an administrative burden and cost to do that. It's not utilized. The way it was set up last time, and it would, I would imagine it would be the same way this time, is that the repeal would go into place. There'd be a date certain set out in the future where we would set aside funds to pay any claims that were on it. And then we would likely, any leftover money, we would refund it to inspectors that have paid into the fund, and then the remaining balance of that would go into GR. So the inspector industry has been on board with this. We've tried to get this done for the last couple of sessions. Last session was the furthest we've gotten. It just died because of no reason other than it just got caught up in the things that happened during the session. So it did not, it went to the Senate and didn't go any further than that. But that's what this particular issue is.
Don't have any questions on that one? We'll power through these for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the next one is repeal of the inspector license. So there are two inspector license types. There's two pathways to get an inspector license. There's through the apprentice sponsorship pathway, and then there's the substitute experience pathway where you can do it through education only. That was also implemented around the same time as the E&O insurance, and since that went into effect, that's the primary way people get their inspector licenses is through the substitute experience pathway. The sponsorship apprentice pathway is where you become an apprentice, then you go through a next step, which is a real estate inspector license, and then you go to the next step, which is the professional inspector license. That's very, I don't know how many real estate inspectors we have. It's under 200, I believe, right? Something like that. So what this would do would repeal it for anybody coming in. It would maintain a license for those people who are currently licensed because there are certain things that they can do and they can even upgrade. So we don't want to have any issues with what they currently do, but for anyone coming in, it would repeal or it would get rid of that license type. So you would just have the professional inspector license. Texas is the only state in the country that licenses inspectors that has a two-tier licensing type. So it would get us in line with the rest of the country, and it would also eliminate that burden for the complication and the burden for staff and incoming inspectors. And then the last thing is the Real Estate Recovery Trust Fund. This would be to raise the limits, current statutory limits. Right now, they're $50,000 per transaction, $100,000 per, capped at 100,000 per license type. The fund was established in 75. Those limits have not been raised since 1991. As you all know, costs to, suit, for lawsuits and stuff have increased. So it likely needs to be adjusted. We don't really have an idea. Your feedback would be great on that for what that would be. But as well, we'd likely need to adjust, there's a cap limit on the amount that we collect, and anything over that gets put into GR. That 3.5 million, correct, that would likely need, all of those would need to be adjusted.
So would you put a CPI or something and see what that number looks like? I mean, from when did you say it was 91?
91, yeah, we could do that.
I mean, I'm just curious.
Just having, yeah, we could do that to get an idea.
Yeah.
Anyway, those are the three items. Any questions on any of those that I'm was presenting on in terms of legislative initiatives?
Like them all.
Okay, stay close, Tim.
Right.
Okay, cleanup.
Is this one you think it's pink? So we've got just some occupations code 1101 cleanup. There's still some language in 1101 that relates to residency, and there is no residency requirement, so we'd like to see if we can get those references out. We've got some portions of the statute still set out the requirements here to obtain a broker. Yeah, that's the same, that's residency.
Non-resident.
All
Yeah.
three.
And amend all references to non-resident applicants, because there is no difference. Also, there is, as it relates to the unauthorized practice of law, there's a reference in there, and it is like just escaping my brain.
It's property owner versus principal.
Yes.
There's some references to a property owner, which only takes into account the seller, right? Not both principals. So just clarify.
Yeah, and that implicates our rule language. So in order to make that adjustment, we need the statute to match what we would do in the rule. Okay, this is me. I'm gonna try and cover this. I sent you a paper, and it dealt a lot with military spouse stuff, which we will get into at a different workshop. But in that same paper, there was a discussion about some recommendations that were brought forward by the Broker Responsibility Working Group. And ultimately, it was to increase experience required to obtain a broker's license and decrease education requirements to obtain a broker's license. Is a little bit of a toggle, with the idea being that, and it was said even earlier today, experience likely gets you a lot further in things than education. Education's not nothing, but our education requirements are significantly higher than other states, and so the thought was, do we want to make that toggle? BRWG met, gosh, you remember Commissioner Lerner like a million times on this topic. We had a lot of meetings, came forward with a recommendation. It's a little late for session. Session was weird with COVID stuff, so we're back here, and I've boiled it down a little bit. You have your paper that talks more about it. In statute, it actually says the exact number of hours required for education. There's some detail on experience, but we get to determine what constitutes active experience, and that's where we get our points from. So that's in rule with the experience stuff that we can do. In terms of education, it's currently set at 60 with 18 classroom and 42 qualifying. So total of 60, 18 classroom, 42 qualifying. BRWG recommendation is to cut the total from 60 to 42, and you would do that by reducing the number of qualifying to 24. And so the legislative component of this is there's two ways to do that. One would be, and this is the simple path, and nothing is simple because legislative session is unpredictable, but would be those numbers already in statute, cut them 42, 18 would stay the same, 24, or do we look at getting into a cap? So the commission the commission will determine in rule the number of hours required to obtain your broker's license, not to exceed 60, let's say. And then that gives the agency that rulemaking authority versus having to go to the legislature anytime we think there's a need for a change. There's that cap, so there's that safety in there, of us not, going wild. But, that would allow, that would really allow, one, the rulemaking process to happen. It actually allows for a lot more stakeholder input because rulemaking is done here and we've got folks from all over who can provide public comment and get in there, et cetera. So that feels really good to the extent that we could get that and work with it and see, oh gosh, well that recommendation actually it really needed to be toggled to this. This is what we started to see with our data and maybe, I'll say you don't want a moving target on this at all times. You want any changes to always be made with a lot of data and understanding who you're impacting, but we would have that data. So that's what that looks like. I'd be interested to hear feedback on that as we move forward. Again, this is the initial, but I think we really want to think about that. I've got some draft language going just so that I have something in my head, and I would love to hear your input. It doesn't, this is an ongoing conversation, but that's a really big one. That's a significant change for the license holder and for the consumer, and what would that mean? Conditional dismissal, Chelsea was just talking about the conditional dismissal process in terms of, I'm gonna make this up, hey, you didn't include your broker's name on your advertisement, if you have not provided, evidence of cure within 10 days, we will proceed with a more form, whatever, I'm not making that up. Okay, great. What we found in our research, we were looking at other agencies that do conditional dismissals and what they have, different options, is something that's a little bit less shallow than conditional dismissal, but not necessarily full blown. It's this idea of a remedial plan, and we're seeing other agencies, they've got this authority and statute to create these set out remediation plans of, in order to come into compliance on this bigger issue, we expect you to have achieved X goal within 30 days, X goal within 60 days, and if not, whatever. So it would be a formal corrective plan. And if that is something that is of interest, and it's like just to really think about, because we have not talked about it, and we will, is that something that is of interest to this commission to look at? Yes.
Can you give an example of when you would use that?
Well, even like on a broker responsibility issue, in 30 days we need to see a policy, in 60 days we need to see training, something like that.
That was really good. Wow. And so that's something that we'd want, you put that in statute, and then we've got this, hey, the commission is authorized under this section to lay out a remedial plan, this is an option for you, or we can pursue, something else. So we'd want to seek that in statute, it'd be in 1101.
Study guides. We have 3 more slides, y'all, and these are going to be quick ones. There is a requirement within our statute that that obligates us to publish examination study guides. We've never done it. I'm just being perfectly frank. The obligation was established, we think, in 2015. We do not know why. I have an assumption that it was for purposes of revenue generation, that by adding it to the statute, we could then create a study guide and sell it. I don't like that idea. I don't actually know that that's the reason. I can't quite figure out why it would otherwise have been established. We only contribute to the state portions of the exam. We don't have any feedback on what the federal exam looks like. So we're really not in the best position to provide a study guide. The provider industry is much better suited for that. There is already a market for one. And as such, I just want to eliminate this. Strangely, it is on both the board and the commission side. It's been on the board side for longer, and they used to be the establisher of the exam. That makes sense. So it seems like it was added to mirror what the board did, but in a way that doesn't seem appropriate for kind of the way we want to lead it. Any questions?
Actually, we did have one years ago, because that's the way I passed the test. And it was Texas, it was all a Texas test when I took the test.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
The national just came in 10 years, maybe 15 years ago.
Yeah, it was all Texas when I took it,
Okay.
but that was a while ago.
I guess the main question is, are you comfortable with us seeking to eliminate?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, next one. This is not a new issue. It was a little bit complicated during the last session. During the last session, we realized that there was a discrepancy in our statute in how we collect fees for the Texas A&M Research Center. We were, and so we worked with stakeholders to get a bill filed to correct that discrepancy. Essentially, there was reference to an annual fee. We only collect fees every 2 years upon renewal. We were basically collecting twice as much as statute allowed. We did find kind of a workaround because that bill did not pass, but it was only a partial workaround. It allowed us to collect fees for renewals, but not for new applicants. And so we'd like to just basically pursue a similar bill to last year to correct that discrepancy. And then lastly, wholesaling, quite the topic of conversation. As you know, we did 2 surveys on the topic of wholesaling. For the survey for license holders, wholesalers, sellers and buyers, we received 4,500 responses with 3,200 open-ended comments, which we have organized. No, I shouldn't even say we. Summer has organized beautifully. Of the respondents of that one, about 25% were wholesalers, about 50% were agents or brokers, 7% were consumers selling a property, 17% were consumers buying a property. The responses that we found, if you just do these broad brush strokes, were pretty much what you would expect to hear. Wholesalers find legitimacy to the work that they do. They say they fulfill a need within the market. A pretty good percentage of wholesalers are already licensed. I'm going to be able to tell you that in just a second. Well, maybe I don't have it on these notes. When I say around 30%, 35%.
It was in your notes.
Yes. So wholesalers are, find legitimacy to that work. They also, of those licensed, consider the education they receive to become licensed helpful in the work that they do, which I find instructive. Agents and brokers did not like the act of wholesaling. Words like predatory were used. Among the consumers, there seemed to be general confusion over what the process was. How is this different from flipping? Some sellers didn't know until closing that they weren't selling their house to the wholesaler. That seems to be the problem. So what we gathered from the survey is doesn't seem to be, or we didn't receive data that would indicate from the consumers that there's this wholesale consumer protection issue that would just absolutely lend itself to requiring a license for wholesalers. That may be what happens. We don't really have a dog in this fight, I would say, but there wasn't just any sort of strong evidence that would cause the agency to run to the legislature saying, here's a huge problem. Because of the confusion among consumers, it does seem important to expand disclosures. Right now, the law requires the wholesaler to disclose to that next buyer the type of income that they hold, right? But there's no obligation to inform the seller of their intentions. And so I think as kind of a next step, there could be room for that, for disclosure to the seller. And so depending on your thoughts, our next step would be to just coordinate with stakeholders, primarily Texas realtors. I don't know what they're thinking on this front. And just see what their membership would suggest and just see if there's any sort of overlap in terms of going to the legislature with information. And if they haven't asked, they could that route.
I think that would be an easy cleanup, a start.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, identifying one party, now just all parties, or disclosing to one party, now all parties, I think that would be.
Disclosure always seems to be helpful, it seems to be
Well, it's kind of a
protective.
no-brainer
Right.
in terms of, that part of it.
And you really wonder why it wasn't done the first time, but.
I think that was just because people thought the harm was just from the buyer's point of view.
Right.
The end user.
Yeah, and not really thinking about the impact it had on the seller as well. That's mine.
I mean, I get that, but, of course, a lot of stuff, well, I knew they were gonna flip it, I might have done something
Exactly.
different, right?
Well, they would advocate for themselves
Yeah.
differently, likely.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
essentially, their property's worth more.
Exactly.
All right, is that good? We good?
I got one question. Is there a rule that if you are a license holder and you are buying a property, one, you have to disclose that you're an agent, licensed agent in the state of Texas? Do you also, it seems like in my past, or HB, our company, we demand that they say we are buying this for profit. Isn't that a rule?
There used to, I was taught that. but
That's
I
what
don't
I was
know.
taught too.
We had a huge lawsuit against us that we lost years ago, and that was the whole thing, we didn't close it.
Yeah, so I think it's part of the law. And so are those people who are licensed at 37%, are they actually following the law? But it's not until a consumer complains about it that anything's gonna happen.
Quick question. Now that Summer's here to properly promote, are you gonna do coffee with the commission again?
Great question. I think Abby may have a response to your question, and then we'll get to copy of the commission. That's a great question.
I was just gonna say, so we do have a rule that does require disclosure of your interest, in terms of what your interest actually is. That's for business entities. There's not that component in the rule, but that could be a larger sort of, are you?
I think we all learned from her case.
Uh-oh, so sorry. Copy with commission you asked about. We have bounced around what that might look like in the future. The most recent discussion was potentially a podcast. We like the idea of having a little bit more control over the topics of conversation and that sort of thing, but also just to get to be able to catch a larger group of people by making it recorded. We did this webinar last week, and it's on a YouTube channel. And so the question I had for Summer is, well, should we do a webinar instead of a podcast? And she said, well, if you do a webinar, then you essentially have a podcast also because you have the audio, right? So you could kind of do it both ways. So that's one of our next things to address. But yes, we will do something like it. I think we may want to rebrand it just to have a restart.
Well, I'll put that under future agenda items. All right, just real quick, we had a discussion yesterday on future workshops and commission meeting dates. And this is kind of, we thought maybe have the workshop after the commission meeting, and I think we're just so mentally drawn afterwards. I just don't know if we get anything done. We kind of kicked around maybe coming in on Thursday morning, having the workshop Thursday afternoon, the commission meeting on Friday, and having it a one-day trip to Austin. And it's always been on Monday. I don't know why it's always been on Monday, but you could fly in Thursday, do a workshop Thursday afternoon, commission meeting on Friday, and maybe not have workshop on every commission date, but have the availability on a Thursday afternoon, Friday morning versus a Monday morning and Tuesday morning. So
That's a great idea.
I mean, we're open to make it easier. And I think a lot has to do with room availability and stuff like that. So there's probably a whole lot more moving targets, but we're open to ideas. Okay? So just, we're not doing it next Thursday, just FYI, okay? Are y'all,
That's a good idea.
okay?
We should check with the board too. I don't know if they are having one this Friday, but I don't know if they typically have it on Friday.
They always have.
They do.
Their meetings are
They do.
on Fridays.
So we didn't have it on the same Friday, but we're good. And the only variable to that is that hotels on Friday tend to be more expensive, but we've got the money. It's all fine.
But that'd be
We'd only
Thursday night.
staying Thursday.
It'd be Thursday night,
I
right?
think Thursday's still.
Right. I would like a motion to adjourn, but I don't think we have a quorum.
Well, then
Well, I guess it's
So
over.
we are adjourned.
that's.
Thank y'all. And staff, thank y'all for great
Yes, thank
presentation.
you.
I agree.
I mean, every time we do this, we get more and more information.
And then all.
Then I can still email them.
Yeah.
And I can still bring the stupid questions.
Thank you all very much.
Thank